And we are live. We're with Brian Lucey, mastering engineer, musician. The last hangout we did with him was awesome. We talked about so much more than mastering. His whole philosophy on life, everything. We went into all kinds of stuff. Let's see. Billy Rubin, props to you. Ash Todd, thank you for catching that mistake. Khalid Glover had a hangout. Props to Khalid Glover. He's always helping. And he pushed his off because he and I ended up with this one at the same time. Did not happen on purpose, but props to Khalid and thank you. Khalid, if you want to join, just let me know. It's on. You're always welcome. Brian, one of the guys, Rick Carson, just to get this started, I want to go ahead and hit you with Rick Carson's question. Let's see. Rick Carson wanted to know, he says, he wants to know if you have any experience with CubeTech plugins.
I do not. I'm sorry. I don't use any plugins except a couple things that come in Sequoia, so I'm not the best plugin question guy. We'll cut those off right at the bud.
What plugins come with Sequoia? Because a lot of people like me, I'm not even from. I know a little bit about Sequoia and that it's awesome, but no
yeah,
clue.
it's German. It's precise. It sounds good. It's easy to use. It's good for mastering in a lot of ways too. I just use a little linear phase and occasionally a little de-esser, and that's it.
You say it's good for mastering also. That's the only thing I really know it's used for. What else is it used for?
Oh, it's a complete like multi-track platform. It's like a Pro Tools substitute.
You actually use it to make songs?
I don't. No, I just use it for mastering. But some people use it with 150 tracks and a MADI interface, and it's PC only, which is a little off-putting for some people. But it's German, so the shit works, and it really sounds great.
Okay. Brad Chapman, welcome.
Hey guys, thanks so much for inviting me. I can't hang a long time, but I'm always super interested in what is going on in the recording world.
Great, nice to have you, Brad. Send a question before you leave.
You see how he's laid back in the bed and everything, looking like he
Man, I'll trade you my pain for your chair any day.
It's Sunday.
I know, but yeah, there you go. There's my excuse.
There you go.
I'm doing the same thing.
Good covering on Sunday.
All right, Todd, you had a question for him. I'm going to go ahead and throw it to you.
Yeah, let's get busy. I can't do 4 hours today.
All right, we'll hold you to 3:59.
Know what converters that you're using, and what are you using as for clocking as well?
I use the same A to D converter that I've used for a really long time, and in fact, my chain is kind of it's become an instrument where it's a done deal. I'm not experimenting anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The A to D I use is the Pacific Microsonics. It's Class A, discrete circuitry that, in modern parlance, wouldn't be the cleanest thing ever. It has a tone, but to me, it's a lovely thing. It has a little soft top and a little tube mid-range, and Class A discrete conversion clips really well. It has a ridiculous amount of headroom. The unit is like, you can see my hands. It's like 20 inches deep. It's 3 rack space? Yeah, three rack spaces high, and it has an external power supply that's like the size of a power amplifier on a 20-pin connector. So it was built price no object in the mid-90s to be the front end for the HD CD, the high definition compact digital, which you may remember if you're old enough to have seen that logo on CDs back in the day. So they built these boxes not to make money. It was built on a tonal passion kind of front because they thought they were going to clean up selling HD CD units to Sony and Panasonic. But I first heard it on some Bob Ludwig records in the mid-90s, and I picked up a used one. They were like 16 grand new or something. I picked up a used one around 2002, and I now have a spare, and it's part of my sound. The important part of all that for you would be probably only that Class A discrete is a good way to go for clipping conversion and mastering. If you're a mastering engineer, that's an important aspect. The Sterling guys have liked the Lavery Gold stuff for years. I don't know what they use now, but I really love this one. And I don't plan on changing. I have no need to go anywhere with my system. It's a done deal.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure thing.
Is it the Model 2 or Model 1 that you're using?
I use the Model 1. I use
Model
the
1, okay.
Yeah, I mean they each unit sounds tiny bit different just from component choices, but in theory they all sound the same. And Model 2 is a higher sample rate. I've never done the shootout between the two, but I have a Model 1. I like to print 24-44-1 because if you go 96 or 88.2, you're actually not hearing the 44-1 product. And to me, the quality of conversion lies more in the converter and the clock than in the numbers. The numbers game is really a kind of a penis measuring bullshit thing to me. I don't hear a Guitar Center converter that does 192 that costs $150 sounding better than my 1990s $16,000 thing running at 24-bit 44-1. It's not even a thought that a sane person would think. So I like to hear 24-bit 44-1, and I chop 8 bits, and we're done. And if it requires a high def, then there's other things that I can do. But yeah, I really like for most of the time I like running 24-44-1, so I'm really hearing the product without any digital trickery.
Can I jump in while we're talking sampling rates?
Yeah, and sorry, just interrupt. To answer your question, the internal clock in the Pacific Microsonics is what I use. There's a fad, every so often for clocks. It's kind of like speakers; they go in phases. The new fad is the aardvark stuff. I even had a very famous New York-based mixer that I won't mention, who's kind of insisted that I try it for a project that he mixed. He had talked the client into asking me a very strange question, which is, what kind of clock do you use? I'm like, dude, no one's ever asked me that. That's a really weird question. Like, you want me to do this or not? And it ended up leading to a discussion of discovering that he had been told by this guy that there was this clock that was the bee's knees. So I was skeptical because the people that were enjoying the clock, people like Ludwig or others that he had mentioned, they have very complex systems. And I have a very simple system. I just have a few components. And so I can run things in a daisy chain digitally and also analog. I have no switches. It's just stereo to stereo with some fancy cables that aren't crazy money, but they're a slightly upgraded cable that I like. So everything I have digitally and analog is point to point, and that allows me to use the internal clock in the Pacific. But out of respect for these people, I rented the aardvark, and personal opinion, that stuff is very, very bad. It clarifies things in a way that could lead you to be excited about detail or definition, but I think it's ultimately not very musical. Low mid-range is not musical. The high end is not nice in any way. So I think that people that are enjoying that clock either have a very complex system like Bob has, or if you're a mixer and you've got a bunch of DigiDesign products, you can upgrade the clock in those with an aardvark type product. No, I'm sorry, not aardvark. I'm completely wrong. It's antelope. The new fad right now is antelope. So bottom line, I thought it was sterile and unmusical, and it totally ruined my rig. I mean, I listened to it for about 15 seconds. But I'm very happy with the internal clock and conversion that they ear tested in the mid-90s when money was no object and they just wanted something that sounded great to them. All right, next question.
With
Brad. Oh, go ahead.
With all the Pro Tools converters running up to 192, I've always ran my sessions at 24-bit, neither 44.1 or 48. With it going up to 192, how do you feel about getting one of those sessions when everything is going to be at 44.1 anyway? I mean, should you just keep it down at 44.1 or what?
It's kind of two different questions there. I'm going to answer the way that I think you're meaning it. To talk real quickly about converters, there are three components of a converter. Forgive me if you already know this, I'll do it quickly. There's the converter chip itself, there's the clock that runs the chip, and there's the analog circuitry into and out of the box. Okay, those things are fixed things. They are physical reality, right? Then the user portion that we talk about is this sample rate part. So, to my mind, a converter sounds like it sounds. And what I mean by that is, if I have a metric halo box running at 44.1, and I run that metric halo box at 88.2, or I run that metric halo box up to 196 or whatever, it changes the presentation of the frequencies, and it changes the little bit of how the details are rendered. But it really still sounds like itself. And if I compare that to, a Digidesign Avid product from a few years ago, or their new stuff, which is better, it's a very different sound no matter the sample rate. So what you're actually doing with sample rate is more about a little bit about A to D, but it's more about setting up your plug-in chain. So I personally think the sweet spot is 88.2, because people like Dave Hill and others who are much smarter than I am, who are friends of mine, they have me convinced that going over 96K is just a total waste of time. And in fact, everything that I know about how I work tells me that the converter is way more important than the numbers. So 88.2 kind of sets your plugins up, or 96K sets your plugins up nicely. And then, of course, you don't want to clip them. That's a whole other discussion. But as far as what am I concerned about, which is the second part, I don't care, because as soon as I move something a half dB or a quarter dB, I've made a bigger change than whatever your converter sample rate thing is. It's really not that big of a deal. What's more important is the actual sound of the three components, which are hardware fixed in the unit. The clock, the analog path, and the chip. Those are really what makes the thing. So I mentioned metric halo, and I like that converter a lot for a clean converter. It's really, really nice. Sort of reminds me of the radar stuff, but in a totally different way. It's equally as musical, although it sounds different. Those guys agree with me. I'm like, if I'm running your stuff, I'd run it at 44.1 because it sounds great. Why would I consume all the juice? Why would I have to go 48 to 44.1 if I'm kicking something out for the client? Why mess with that math if you don't have to? And they agree. Now, does it sound different at higher rates? Yes. It always sounds different at higher rates, but different isn't better. Different is about the presentation of those three components we mentioned, which are hardware fixed. The presentation changes, the low end changes, the high end changes, the reverb tails and the detail bits become more of the focus at the higher rates. But to me, that's a little bit like the fad with this analog clock. That kind of ear candy isn't what matters to me. What matters to me is the emotional connection between the source and the listener. And the emotional connection lies in those three hardware components. It doesn't lie in the sample rate. There's nothing you can do with the sample rate to make a better recording. There's something you can do with it to set up your plugins. There's something you can do with it to hog the bejesus out of your hard drive. But if you're trying to make better records, more musical records, the numbers aren't the deal. So I don't care at all. I want to hear mixes that speak with a vision, that have an undeniable connection between the artist, the song, the production. I want undeniability. And if you listen to someone like Daniel Lanois, who is now, sort of off the radar, but like Rick Rubin, these are guys of my generation that are sort of timeless producers from the last 20 years. I mean, Lanois printed to 16-bit DAT most of his career. He might still do it. Listen to Emmylou Harris' Wrecking Ball, or listen to Time Out of Mind by Bob Dylan, and tell me that would have sounded better with a new converter running at 96K. It's ridiculous. He has beautiful microphones. He has, Neve and API preamps. He's got a beautiful room, and then he knows how to get performances out of the artist where they're comfortable and they deliver. All of that is 99.99999%. The sample rate thing is a weird male penis measuring product selling game, which has no bearing on reality, and you really just got to step away from that.
Cool. Thanks for the info. Yeah, because I mean, all these years, I mean, I've always ran it low down at the, you know, like I said, either 44.1 or 48, and I never once took it up to 96 or 192, and I never felt the need.
I don't know. I don't claim to be the expert on where people are at these days, but I'm pretty sure that going over 96 is just kind of like dumb. And I think that going to 88 or 96 is a good idea for plugins. But again, if we're talking about sonics, I really want to drive home this idea that the sound of converter is the clock, it's the chip, it's the analog components. That's why I use a Class A discrete item from the 90s and intend to use it for the rest of my career. I mean, I've got a spare. I intend to use that thing and its brother for parts until I drop dead. And I'm not even questioning that, you know. So when you're listening to conversion, you know, try a few converters, you know. Try the Metric Halo for clean, try the Burl for color. The new Digidesign product is pretty good. But really just understand that the main thing you're listening to is those three hardware components that are fixed. The game with the numbers is really a practical thing for you when you're setting up your plugins. And for me in a mastering situation, I don't give a shit. I want you to do something that's awesome. That's the bottom line. Something that speaks, something that's fearless, something that's passionate and isn't thinking about rules or numbers or fear of being loud enough. Something which is musical for your style, something which represents the uniqueness of the artist, something which is undeniable. That's what we want to do. The rest of it is just a giant waste of time.
That totally makes sense. Thanks again.
Sure thing, brother. Good luck with it.
Welcome, Khalid.
Hey, what's up, man? Can you hear me?
Hear you well.
Oh, great, great. Hey, what's up, everybody, and what's going on? It's nice to meet you, Brett.
Hey, Khalid, nice to meet you.
Pleasure, man. I'm just sitting back and enjoying, so don't mind me.
All right. Well, you got any mastering questions or production questions or anything? Throw it my way.
I sure will. I sure will. But I'll let everybody else get theirs in. Go ahead, guys, and do your thing. I'm just chilling.
Okay, Brad has over here, what do you think about limiting and compressing vocalists during tracking? And let me just get into that a little bit. We had a discussion yesterday where he and Rick St. Hilaire were saying that during the mix or like during the final stages, say you're staging that, well, first off, when a singer's singing, they're fighting the compressor, and that you could actually tell, like, it affects the end result. When you're mastering, can you tell that compression is done wrong, say during the tracking stage? Like, can you actually hear that a singer is actually fighting the compressor? Have you ever picked up on that?
No, I mean, that's all, you know, that's tracking. That's the art of tracking. I mean, in my experience as a producer, I think, like everything in this game, there's really no rules. I mean, some singers, you need to set them up in front of a mic and have it be uncompressed, and they need to be in a bathroom. Some people want to be out in the main room with a spotlight on them so they feel like they're on stage. Some singers are better with a handheld because they're used to being live performers. And, you know, I've set up people with a Neumann handheld and done an EQ cut going in and compressed the shit out of it. And that made them comfortable. So it's all about the performance, and therefore it's all unique to the artist in the moment. You know, I don't think there are any rules for that. Just like really everything else, I think it has to be in the moment. The principles are what matters, and the principle in vocal tracking to me is best performance. Best performance means what? It means emotionally connecting via storytelling and artistic identity. How do we get there? We get there with the person being comfortable and letting out their particular personal magic in the freest way, in the most emotionally connected way. That's the things I think of. I don't think of a compressor or not a compressor or a, you know. So it just depends on the person, and tracking engineering is an art form unto itself. You know, tracking, mixing, mastering, those are the three crafts. And a craft can become an art if you do it at a high level. Those are the three crafts of music production, and that's its own world, you know. So I don't hear that because when I hear it, you know, I'm assuming people like what they've sent. You know, they've taken care of that. Things that I hear would more fall in the category of what we talked about last time, which got very deep and we spent a long time on it. I'll make it short and sweet. I hear people being fearful. I hear people trying too hard, which is a component of being fearful, like trying too hard to get your attention, as opposed to the allure of drawing you in. Trying too hard sounds like a product, and maybe that works for a certain style, but in general, music is about intimacy and connection. So, you know, I hear trying too hard, and then in production, I hear fear, over-compressing because they're trying to be loud, as opposed to being appropriately dynamic from part to part, section to section, to suit the style, knowing that someone like me isn't going to fuck it up. But because a lot of people in my business, in my opinion, aren't very good, there are a lot of habits that people develop where they're overcompensating. Or they ask their mastering engineer, how do I mix, which is like the death knell. You don't ask me how to mix. That's not for me to say. You know, it's my job to take something that you love in the room that brought you to life when you did it in your car with the group, and to nurture that to a whole other level that's beyond what you thought was possible. That's the world I live in. So asking me, you know, how to mix or which take it is, I'm like, I don't know. You want the ice cream on top vocal? You want the treading water vocal? It's not my call. You know, you want that big snare, that big kick? I don't care. You know, I'm not making the record. I'm taking it to another level. So that's my position on it. I went a little off topic, but I do that.
I love this guy. He's giving you all the truth. You know, I love it because you didn't give them the technical, you know, mastering engineer typical answer. You gave the answer of what it's all about. It's about music.
I mean, Brad's got a follow-up here, but I was an artist. I was in a band for years. I studied music with Robert Fripp for 7 years in Guitarcraft. I was a full-time musician in New York City when I was 18.
Oh,
I've made records on tape. I've made records in the box. I've produced artists. I've mixed stuff.
Yeah,
I come to mastering late in life as an artist, frustrated with the rest of the people doing this gig.
I'm already with you because you said Robert Fripp, so I got you. You know what's up.
Yeah, I mean, I come to this gig frustrated with the overly technical approach to this job. You know, back in the 80s, the people who were doing mastering in a lot of cases, not every case, I don't want to be insulting, but in a lot of cases it wasn't really viewed in an artistic way because it really wasn't. It hadn't evolved to an artistic position. So you had people who were kind of antisocial and super nerdy and, you know, very technical, who were sort of, you know, in the game, but they were doing this sort of last piece. And there's still a perception today that that's a bit of really what mastering is, sort of the, well, my guy didn't screw it up, or they just have a better room and they do some EQ correction. I don't think like that. I think in terms of vision, capitalization, connection, enhancement, taking it further than your vision was intended, where you're like, holy shit, I didn't think we could do it that far. Yeah, you can. Because I hear into the mix what you're intending, because I've been there, you know. So I'm not a technical-minded guy. So Brad, follow up.
Did you have a follow-up to that, Brad, question? Nope. Oh, he's on the phone. Mayurek, you had a question?
Just like stretching his hand. He's like,
Yeah,
it's like Sunday. Like, yeah, it's feeling good.
Now, he had a back operation. He can't be on his feet too long.
I'm sorry to hear that. I have scoliosis, so I know the back situation.
Ooh.
It's not pretty. But it did lead me to meditating, which did lead me to hearing music much better, and it led me to mastering. So, you know, I think in life, everything for a reason.
Okay, I want to get back to that after Mayuresh asks his question, that hearing the music better. Mayuresh,
hey, how you doing?
hit him with it.
I got a question for you. Do you get hassled by either artists or producers or record labels? They bring music to you and they say, hey, we want it to sound like this, or, you know, master it in this way or that way. Do you get sort of any extra pressure or I mean, it's one thing is different, that where they give you some idea of what they want, but this completely other thing is where they're pressuring you to make it sound like this artist and pump it really hard or whatever, you know.
Sorry, what was the last sentence?
I said like they're trying to match some other artists or some other.
Yeah, the sentence you said that had the word hard in it. Something was hard.
Yeah, like you know, you hear the Loudness wars and stuff, so they're trying to match what's out there in the market.
Yeah. No, of course. Well, I mean, not to be cocky about it, but I'm really good at my job. So most people come to me for what I do, and what I do is also flexible because I'm not some sort of egotist about it, like where it has to be a certain way. So most people say, hey, do your thing, and then they comment, and we revise, and we're done, and everyone's happy. So I have that life most of the time. Now, occasionally, someone will say, you know, we've been listening to such and such a thing that isn't something that you did, and we want it to be kind of like that. And I say to them, fine, you know, let's have a listen to that. But the thing there is that most people's idea of a ref for a mastering engineer, in my opinion, is more of a production ref. In other words, a production ref is a vibe, or it's an inspiring in some way, or maybe we like the low end of this record, or we like this element of that record. A proper mastering ref really, to me, just has a couple general components. It's a volume component and a frequency balance component. That's that's kind of useful. So if someone says, you know, oh, hey, we really liked what you did, but we wanted it as loud as this thing, and then they send that, I mean, to me, that's not really being hassled. That's just clarifying the vision of what they're going for. So that also happens in some cases, you know. So it's a combination of things. Again, it's no hard and fast rules, you know. Some people let me do my thing, first pass, and then I'll comment. Sometimes there's no revisions, like the new Marilyn Manson record. It was no revisions. They revised 2 mixes. They didn't ask me to do anything. And they said Manson hates mastering, and it never had more than 4 revisions. So I was like, great. So that was a good day. But on other days, you know, I might do something very musical and very cool, but it isn't what you had in mind. So then you say, oh, well, this is what we had in mind. Maybe it's words. Maybe it's a track. Okay, no problem. To me, this is an easy gig. It's an effortless gig. There are a lot of musical options. Some are louder, some are more dynamic, some have more low, some have more mid, some have more high. It's a fairly flexible thing, as long as we end up in a kind of a sphere of options that are frequency balance, harmonic distortion, and transient. You know, there's a kind of an XYZ sphere that I live in, which is frequency, harmonic distortion, and transients. As long as we end up in a sphere that I'm comfortable with, then I'm good. You know. So yes, some people have the specific things in mind. Sometimes what I do surpasses what they have in mind. Sometimes what I do isn't exactly it, and then we'll clarify it by email or a couple tracks. But it's not a big deal.
Cool.
What you find, and again, I don't want to be a dick about this, but what you find with certain people with mastering is like revision after revision after revision, because basically they don't really have anything to offer. You're like trying to get something on the cheap, and you're trying to roll a rock up a hill, and then you end up trying to tell them how to do their job, and you start saying, well, hey, you know, what EQ did you use there, and let's try it, cut at 500 or whatever. And like, if it gets to be that specific, then it's just, you know, it's pretty tricky. That's a bad situation. My situation, fortunately, is a different thing.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that.
Sure thing. Does that help?
Yeah, heaps. Sort of clears a lot of ideas. I'm mostly a musician. I have a small studio set up, playing bands and mix live bands. So sort of not doing what you're doing, but sort of really interested in, you know, knowing all the aspects. So if I get a record out and send it to mastering, I know, you know, what's going to happen and get a clear picture.
Yeah, well, if you send something out, you know, you're welcome to send a couple refs. I would just say make sure that they're volume and EQ balance, frequency balance refs. That's the useful thing.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's
Brian, I have a couple of questions here.
Sure thing.
Yeah, through the years, did you find yourself going, towards a certain style of music, or do people come to you with a certain style of music, or you generally do everything?
I do everything. I'm known for certain styles of music more than others because of the commercial success of certain records. And so there's kind of a resonance there, but that's not something that you go after. I mean, as a mastering engineer, I truly don't respect specialty mastering engineers. I think that's a gimmick. That's like kind of a mixing fix guy. And to me, that's really not the gig. The gig is about some objective qualities, which are human qualities that we're trying to bring to every product of every style. So there's the subjective world of music, and then there's the objective world of what makes human beings feel music. Okay? So to me, those two come together in mastering. And the subjective is the style, the production, etc. The objective is that there's certain kind of harmonic things that appeal to people. There's certain frequency balances that relate to certain styles that appeal to people. And by appeal, I mean just on a deeply emotional, immediate level. Again, I don't mean to harp on it, but it's a new record I've done that I'm very excited about the last few months, this Manson record. Everyone I've played that for is like, oh shit, I'm a Manson fan now. And I wasn't before in most cases. Because there are some objectively solid things going on in every stage of the production. The songwriting has great sort of clarity and it builds through the parts. The vocal has great intimacy and it connects in a strong way. And the mastering has some things that I did which bring all of those things to a greater level of connection than in the mix. So, if it's a different style, like I did a 3-piece instrumental jazz record the other day. I did a singer-songwriter. I mean, I do like four or 5 records a week. So I see every style. And to me, it's kind of the same gig every day. It's trying to take this subjective, stylistic, subjective production in whatever state that it's in, and elevate that thing to the greatest level of connectability with the widest audience. So the core audience, we want them to love it more than ever, and then we want to expand the audience. And that doesn't really have anything to do with me knowing what the audience is. That has to do with me knowing what human beings like to hear in music. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a lot.
So
I have actually
that's my take.
Question, which is not really related, but sometimes I guess that you have some people that come with non-realistic goals, like they've done something quite nice, but it's not as nice as something else. They mix it in the box without real, good mixing condition, and then they ask you to do something like a big release, like super loud and super dynamic at the same time and super clear. What do you usually tell them, knowing that it's going to be hard to get there at a certain point because of the mix, of the production, of the way it's arranged and everything?
Right. Well, again, like, not to be an ass about it, but I just do that. I do the thing that makes them excited. So, production-wise, I grew up a musician. I got into mastering, doing my own music, and my mixes were terrible. I mean, they weren't the low end, but they were in the low, they were in the second third, 25 to 50%. So I came up mastering my own work and the work of my friends, which was kind of homemade stuff. So I'm really good at that, actually. I mean, I love to do great mixes by great people, but I can take something that's not very good and actually make it sound like it was done in a much better way. So I don't mean to be disrespectful to the question or the frustration that you have, but it's not a frustration that I deal with because, turd polishing is something that I did early on, and I don't say anything to them. I just send it back. To me, it's easy. If something doesn't sound very good production-wise, let's look at a scale. This is, of course, a completely arbitrary, invisible concept, but let's say there's the perfect record that's at 100%, and then there's like bad productions mix-wise that are at 20, 30, 40%. If I get a 20, 30, 40% production, I can take it up to 70% pretty quickly. and they're blown away because that's a huge leap. If I get something that's at 95%, if I can take it to 96 or 7, they're blown away because those people are so good at what they do, they didn't think that was possible. So the degree of change is different, but the level of excitement stays the same. And that's my day-to-day, you know. But if people say to you, you know, I don't know what you say to that. You know, if they're not happy with it, I don't know. Again, it's hypothetical. We'd have to hear it. If I heard the mix and I heard the master, I might not be happy with the master either. You know what I mean? So who's to say? Or I might listen and say, oh, that's pretty good. I would have done it like this, but you know, whatever. So I don't know. I can't really help you with that. That's something you have to work through, to be honest.
Yeah, actually, there was not something that I was thinking, you know, about myself, but there was more something that sometimes, you know, people come with a 30% mix and they want the 100% result. Right. And of course, there, you know, as you know, it's going to be hard because it's only a 30% mix. So if you bring it to 70% or 80%, it's already a huge amount of progress.
Right.
But what happened, or maybe this doesn't happen to you, you know, when they really want the 100%, when they're not really realistic about this, is there a certain example that you take?
I mean, not really. I mean, again, I don't mean to be blunt, but I think that the 70% maybe is more like a 50 or a 40. Like if I get them to 70, they think it's 100. In other words, if I surpass their expectation of what they thought was possible, then they're good. You know, so that's really my gig is to surpass expectations. And I you know, I don't have people who say, oh well, shoot, it doesn't sound like this Arctic Monkeys record or whatever. I don't get that, you know. So I guess I'm fortunate that I'm not dealing with that kind of frustration. But I guess the bottom line for me is that if the leap is big enough and the musical excitement is big enough, then it works. And if the leap isn't big enough, then you just gotta make them happier, you know. That's all I can say there. That's a tough one.
Thanks.
Hey Brian, what is your difference in approach between mastering for digital or for vinyl?
Well, for vinyl, you got a few components, maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 that you want to think about. The low end has to be a little more controlled, particularly down around the low mid bump area. You've got to make sure that, you know, you don't have subharmonic stuff that you can get away with on digital that's blowing it up. Sibilance is a bit of an issue. You've got to be a little more conservative. You know, digitally we can do anything. I can send you back a square wave at, you know, slam to the bejesus, and you know, digital will hold it. Vinyl has its limitations. So low end, subs, sibilance, and then limiting. You know, so a pre-vinyl pre-vinyl master, or pre-mastering for vinyl, if you will, is always going to be, from me, a second pass. I usually charge, you know, half or third or something like that, and it's going to be more dynamic. It's not going to be clipping. It's going to have, if I compressed, which I don't a lot, you know, I might compress a dB. That's a lot for me. If I compressed it, I'll still compress it because that's a musical choice. But I'll clean up the low end, clean up the sibilance, make sure the low end's centered, and make sure that it's got no nasty clipping artifacts. Square waves and vinyl cutters don't mix. They just don't. So, thus the need for a separate vinyl pre-map. You know, it's easy to say, oh, well, we'll just turn down the level of our clipped. No, you won't. That won't fix it. That doesn't fix anything. That's still a square waved, you know, low end could be anywhere, sibilance could be anywhere. You can't do that. You've got to make some subtle tweaks, and that's why I charge less for those tracks. But it's a whole different pass for me. It's a whole other run through the chain.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Talking about vinyl, mastering for vinyls, what sort of, I don't want to get too technical, what sort of frequency sort of thing you would operate for low and on the other end of the spectrum to the high, and sort of
all I can say there is like I just don't push it too far. It's just it's a little bit more conservative. You want a vinyl pre-master to be really more in the mindset of what I think mastering used to be, which was kind of a little bit of a safety mindset, because we've got to deal with that. Now, having said that, the cutter and the pressing company makes all the difference in the world. So, you know, it's really kind of a crapshoot. I mean, I love to use Chris Bellman here in L.A. at Bernie Grunman's. There are other people who cut nicely, but I've worked with Chris a lot. He does a great job. He has a computer assisted cutting lathe. So he listens and makes subjective decisions, but inputs those to the computer, which has a little look ahead, and it can deal with a little bit more of the juicy juice that I like to leave in there than other people could. You know, he can deal with a little bit more of the musicality that I would like to leave in it that I would have left in the CD. Other people can't. You know, the same master sent to different cutters gives you a totally different result for the same reason that different, you know, digital mastering guys give you a different result. They look at music differently. They have a different sense of musicality. They have different skill with the cutting in terms of what they can do for volume and frequency. So it's really kind of a clusterfuck between the pre-master, the cutter, and then the pressing. Pressing matters hugely. There's huge quality swings between, you know, Palace in Germany and like URP here in the U.S., which is very popular, but isn't really great quality in my opinion. So there's these three interactive components. It's not like digital mastering where I do it, you approve it, we're happy, we're done, and that's great. It's really the start of the process.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Like, I could get you to master it for vinyl, and then I send it to someone else to press it, and at the end you listen. Suppose I send you back the vinyl, say, "Hey, have a listen," and you're like, "Hey, that's not what I did." You know?
Right. Well, I mean, I do that for clients. You know, they send back the ref cut. I have a spiral groove turntable upstairs, which is a lovely like 20 grand turntable with the same speakers that I have here, and the smaller power version of my tube amplifier. So in my living room, you know, sitting room for clients upstairs, you know, I've got that playback system where I can play the digital back to back. You know, I don't do it here in the room because it doesn't happen that often, but yeah, I can tell you how we've done. You know, sometimes it shouldn't be approved. You know, there's things that are going to happen. It's not an exact science, but it can go too far. It's a touchy, subjective thing.
Cool. One last thing. If I need to get in touch with you regarding mastering a record or whatever, how do I do that? Just online?
Time for a plug. I am Brian at magicgardenmastering.com. On the web at www.magicgardenmastering.com. People used to make fun of that because they were cynical and they, you know, magic, like they thought I was the magician and I was overvaluing mastering. I'm like, no, the magic is in the music. I am the gardener. This is the metaphor that went by the minds of people in 2002 and 5. Anyway, most of them are out of business. Hit me.
Thanks. Yeah.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to put something on the screen here real quick. Check out Dominique. I have seen baby after baby on Dominique's screen, and on the he's walking around outside. He just had an infant. Is that a real baby? That's really a baby.
Yeah, dude. Sorry, I'm on mute. This is Frank.
Frank.
I'm down. Yeah, we have a show at the bottom of the screen. While you guys were talking, there's a show going on at the bottom of the screen with him and the kids, him playing father.
Nice.
The thing about meditation, Brian, I had a question that I had typed up to the side about what people could do to help them be able to hear better. Because, like when I first started compressing, I was looking at you know, how much I'm compressing, like I could see the gain reduction. I'm doing all this technical stuff based on what I would see, you know, engine eye and whatever. But then I just stopped and started listening and started attacking what I was hearing, you know, specifically what I was hearing and taking care of that. What is it that you would say to people to help them start hearing stuff better in the mix?
Well, that's a big one. That's really important, of course. Where do we begin? Well, let's start with this. Monitoring is probably the most undervalued aspect of music production in this era of the last, you know, 10, 20 years where everyone started doing their own stuff. It's really easy to get excited about, you know, buying everything except monitors, and it makes no sense because the monitors that are on the market now are the worst shit that's ever been produced in the history of mankind. Like the low-end stuff that appeals to you because you got so many $100 is just complete trash, right? Let's keep in mind that monitoring is in its infancy. If you think about an amplifier, this is going to be a long answer, I can tell already. Forgive me. If you think about amplifier design, amplifiers have been around a long time. An amplifier takes a signal, which is already electricity, hooks it up with some juice coming out of the wall via different kinds of circuitry, class A, B, D, etc., H, G, and it amplifies a signal. So it takes a thing that exists and it turns it up. Oh, that doesn't sound too difficult. Okay, a speaker takes the signal on 2 wires, runs it into these drivers, through these crossovers, what have you, turns it into sound in the room where you feel like you're looking at Beyonce and feeling the emotion of, you know, the Black Keys or Rihanna or whoever. That's a tricky deal, okay? Speakers are still new technology. So even great speakers, and by great I mean, you know, the ones that I use and ones that are more money. There's speakers that are 50, 60, 80 grand a pair. They're still exploring. So when you're looking at your $500 speakers that you have for a year, and then you're like, oh shit, now I need those $1,500 speakers, and then you have those for a year, and you're like, oh, now I need these. What's really happening there is that your listening is evolving to where you just get fed up with the limitations of what you've been using. So moving on to the second part of this answer, the way that we relate to speakers is very much like a relationship. It's like a male-female relationship. It's like a friendship. And the room is part of that too. The room is, depending on the acoustics of your room, between, these are just very vague, not real numbers, but 30% and 70% of your room. If you take a pair of amazing speakers and put them in a horrible room, it's a disaster, right? And if you take a pair of like mid-rangey speakers like Avantones, you can put them in almost any room and they're going to sound basically the same. Why? Because they're 100 hertz to about 14K. They've got no crossover. They've got no port. They don't really bounce off the walls very much. You listen to them at 1.5 meters. So that's a consistent tool. Like NS10s were a consistent tool back in the day when you had these nicely built rooms with big main speakers and you needed a near field. Yamaha comes out with its latest and greatest home speaker. That was the NS10. And it finds its way into this near field application as what we now would consider kind of a mid-rangey speaker. So what I'm trying to say here is that speakers are in their infancy. Our relationship with speakers is an ongoing relationship. The speaker and the room is a huge deal. And what we're looking for from the speaker is the component which is also huge. In other words, in my mind, and I'm fairly unique in this position, although I believe it to be a fact, there are really tracking speakers and there are mixing speakers. They have separate qualities. And in the world of consumerism, manufacturers are selling us one widget to do both jobs. A tracking speaker has more low-end feel, more volume. It doesn't have to be particularly fragile or dynamic. It needs to be ballsy and feel good so that we can be inspired to perform and that it can produce the necessary DI'd bass and drum levels.
Brian, you got accidentally muted. You have to unmute yourself. Okay, go ahead.
I didn't do it. Where was my ramble cut off?
You did it. Speakers, ballsy, have their own.
Yes, playback speakers, ballsy, loud, good for bass DI, good for drums, good for the feeling, inspiring a performance in the room. Okay, similar to a mic chain that we talked about earlier. This is on the performance side. Then there's mixing speakers, which need to be, in my mind, there's a couple different good ways to look at a mixing speaker. One is a full range thing, which is very dynamic, very linear, technically right, but you want it to be musically right also. And then there is like a mid-range dominant thing. Mid-range is where most of the music lives. And a mid-range dominant thing, like again, I like the passive Aventone with any amp. I don't really like their Class D amp, but something like the Aventone is easy to learn, consistent in every room, and a great place to start and end every mix. You start the mix on an Aventone, do some dramatic EQing, do some dramatic panning. You're basically hearing everything in your face. You're going to be more aggressive because you're not listening to this amazing sound. You're listening to this kind of mid-range car stereo type sound. Then you go to your full range speaker, which I think is the second important mix tool. Dynamic, linear, musical, sensitive, revealing. And then at the end of the mix, you come back and you check it. Once you've done all your refinement and your tweaks and your EQs and your reverb tails and your little panning from 42 to 47, like, you know, that kind of stuff. Then you come back and check it again on the Aventone. So I've just given you my suggestion for how to mix. Start with a mid-range thing, go to a full-range thing, come back in the end. When you come back in the end, what you're listening for is like vocal level to snare and kick and bass. And you're looking at the relative levels, which should reflect really well on what you think you have based on the setup you did on the full range. So you rough it in on the mid-range, dial it in on the full range, final check on the mid-range, print, take it to the car. So the going back to the question, what can you do to be better at listening? That's got so many different ways I could answer it. The first component in listening is being quiet in yourself, and this is where maybe not it's maybe not a majority view, but a lot of people I know have some history with doing some kind of self-reflecting. You know, I don't meditate anymore, and I'm not suggesting anybody like join a cult and start doing weird shit. But when your body is in the way of your ears, if you will, when your emotions are in the way of your listening, you can't hear and properly channel the emotion that's coming to you. You have to be a worthy vessel, as William Burroughs once said. You need to be able to know what's going on because you're out of the way, so that when you engage emotionally, you're making the right decisions to serve the moment, to serve the music, to serve the artist. So listening is about that on one side. It's about being more still with yourself, dealing with your, we talked about this last time for like an hour, dealing with negative emotions and dealing with personal baggage so that you're a better vessel for channeling music or assisting in channeling others' music. But there's other ways you can go about it. There's the A-Being thing, which is a stage that everyone must go through, where you literally A-B shit until the cows come home. And during the A-Being, you employ the meditative side, where you have to be still. Most A-Bs aren't a scientifically approved ABX, and that's okay. Like you change the speaker out on a guitar amp, it takes time. You have a electric screwdriver, you have to unplug stuff. Have a couple friends over. Get their opinion. What do we think about the Blue Dog? What do we think about the Greenback? You know, changing tubes is the same thing. The tube has to cool. This is the world I come from, where we would change out things that took time. In the studio, you've got maybe some different EQs. Maybe it's just a plugin. You're trying different plugins. Maybe it's a compressor. It's much more immediate. But it doesn't have to be double-blind ABX. That's kind of silly. Because ultimately, we're looking for the relationship between component A and the rest of the chain. So we've got a chain. We've got a palette. We're trying to cater or expand the palette. So when we're A-Bing things, whether they be microphones, preamps, mic pre-combos, mic pre-compressor combos, converters, speakers, EQs, A-Bing all this stuff is a very important place to work on your listening, because you start to get a sense of what is the arena that we're working in. What does it mean that something is a Class A discrete converter versus a different kind of converter? Is there a difference? Do they share any qualities or do they not? That's an interesting question. Why don't you go explore that? What's the difference between certain tube EQs and certain solid state EQs? Do all tube EQs share components qualitatively, or are they just different designs? And these are interesting questions. And you have to actually do the listening to begin to get comfortable with the arena that we're working in. You know, imagine that there is this kind of sphere, this sonic sphere that we're working in, 20 hertz, 20 kilohertz, or for reasonable people, maybe not 20, we don't hear that well. But there's that sphere. Then there's the harmonic distortion component of that. There's the dynamic component of that. There's how all of that comes out of a speaker, interacts with the room. All of these things they're knowable as like a kind of a body of knowledge. And the longer you do it, and the more A-Bing you do, and the more still you are when you listen, so that you personally can really observe what's going on and really start to kind of catalog it for yourself, then the more it makes sense. You know, in the beginning, it's like, oh, this feels good to me. This sounds good. This sounds good in my room. I like how that sounds. I like that. I like that. I like that. It's a lot of like and dislike. It's kind of similar to being a child. You know, if you have a child, children are like and dislike. That's where we all started as people. It's the same in production. We start with like and dislike. We're attracted to certain things naturally, and we should trust that. And other things really aren't for us. You know, I was talking to a producer the other day, and he said, the same stuff I heard when I was a kid and got me excited excites me now, except now I can do it. I can make it. I can produce it. I can sculpt it. So that's a guy who's in touch with his inner artistic voice. He's listening to himself since he was a kid, and he's gaining skill to move from like and dislike, which is his natural passion, into like something quite kick-ass, something quite substantial, where he can actually make shit happen. He can get things done. He can manifest results that he hears in his head and know that they're going to translate, etc., etc. Does this make sense? So this is the movement that you're going for. Starting with like and dislike, working on yourself and your stillness in yourself and your listening and your ability to listen, which is a personal thing. Doing lots of A-Bing and comparing. Building a world of understanding of what the hell is this music production thing anyway? Is there something here that we can grasp, or is it all just this is what I like or what I don't like? You know, from an engineering standpoint, you've got to have both. There's got to be a balance of subjective, passionate, like and dislike, and there's got to be a sort of overview side to it. I don't like the word technical because to me that separates it too far. It makes it too analytical. But I like the word overview, a sense of knowing what's the arena that I'm working in right here. Where am I? Where am I in the mid-range? Where am I on the whatever, you know? So this is just a time-consuming deal. You know, I'm at a point in my life where I'm actually getting shit done, not learning how to get shit done, although I do still learn. It's in a much more narrow arena. But there was a long period of, you know, extreme passion about what I was attracted to and wasn't, and extreme amounts of effort in comparing gear and comparing speakers and comparing everything and trying to get a ballpark feeling of what is this world? What is this sphere? Does that help?
Yes, bruh, and that thing about quieting yourself and being able to receive, being a vessel, proper vessel, that helps with everything. Because like with Brad Chapman, we're doing all this listening to singers and stuff, and I immediately like put that over to that, like doing that with the singers.
Yeah, like for example, you know, I was working with Lindsay, and we helping with some vocal production to just try and get a good microphone. I hinted at this story before. I'll just throw it out there. So you know, she has sung through the mic, the Neumann 47 that Adele used for the first record. She's sung through that mic. She really liked it for her voice. She's sung through a couple other Neumann 47s that were also good, but not as cool as that one, which is interesting. And it's not because it's in her head, because she doesn't give a shit about that. She's not technical. It just made her more comfortable as a singer. So there's something in that mic, you know. But short of that, we tried all these 47 clones, all these new clones, 8,000, 4,000, 3,000. We tried all these clones. No, they all sound like new microphones. None of them have any kind of magic. They don't really sound vintage at all. And then I noticed something, and this comes from noticing. This comes from listening. This comes from staying out of the way. I noticed that she would kind of sit on a chair and sway her body a little bit and sing, and it reminded me of seeing her as a performer. And then I thought, you know what? You have you have all these years of experience performing, small stages, big stages. You're used to being on stage with the lights on, holding a microphone. Let's try handheld. And like I mentioned earlier, the Neumann live handheld, which is really kind of compressed sounding. It's got a big pop filter. It's got too much low end for the studio. But it's a Neumann microphone. I mean, it sounds great on stage. On stage, it's super clear. It's what, you know, John Legend or Paul McCartney or Nora Jones, if you see these people sing, they're all using it. That list is probably 100 artists. So it's a great live microphone. It's a hypercardioid condenser mic. And I said, put that in your hand, sit over there, and sing that same tune. The musicality was immediately up like 3 levels. The connection to the song was up 3 levels. Now the tone was a little messy. Okay? So I went over and did a little EQ to tape, and we were compressing to tape because she liked that vibe. That was comfortable for her. And we found a chain that changed her life because she was intimidated by standing in front of that microphone. She felt like, oh, I'm in the studio now. Now other people, it'd be the opposite. Like I said earlier, they would want to stand there and they'd want it to be uncompressed. She wanted to have a handheld. That was comfortable. That's where her artistry came out, you know. So I didn't find that solution by thinking technically, or we've got to have this or we got to have that. We tried those things, but we ultimately were looking for the artistry in the person, you know. And that's the kind of observing level that you're going for. You're going for hearing greatness, the potential for greatness in a piece of gear, in a chain of gear, in a way that a person performs, in a whatever, in a production relationship. You're the producer, they're the mixer. You're the mixer, they're the producer. We're looking for chains and palettes and teams that inspire greatness. But in order to do that, you've got to be present passionately, but you also have to really be out of the way so it can resonate with you and you can say, oh, well, that vibes with me. I mean, there are many kinds of music in the world that are good, that I respect, that I can enjoy professionally, that I can truly enjoy without a cocktail. But there are very few things that really, really, really move me. And that's okay. That's normal. And knowing that distinction and being able to live in all those worlds is what professionalism is all about. You know, my gig is all about finding what's awesome in the music. It's not about judging. Honestly, it's not even about traditional listening. A lot of people say, what'd you think of the record? I was like, I don't know. I didn't think about your record. If I'm thinking about your record, I'm listening to your record like a fan, or I'm judging your record like a critic, or like a competitive artist, or what have you. I'm listening to your record like a teammate. I'm trying to make that thing kick ass in whatever way that I feel is exploitable of what you've sent and what you intended. I'm trying to intuit your best vision for this and then exceed that. So this is a whole level of listening which is beyond the nuts and the bolts, but you've got to do the nuts and the bolts. You've got to make your rooms better. Dear universe, fix your damn rooms. If you can't hear it in the room, your ego says, oh, it's okay. So-and-so used this, and it's been done before. No, guess what? You're making your life so much harder by working on shitty monitoring and shitty rooms, because the physics is real. You know, Steve Martin, when he was young, did a stand-up routine, and he sang this funny song, it's just impossible to shove a Cadillac up your nose. It's just impossible. Like, there are things that are real in life that are physics dependent. And the bullshit in your room and your monitoring and how those interact is not something you can really get around. So work on those things. Trap that bass. Treat those rooms. I've been in big rooms that I thought could have sounded better, and every small room, of course, I've ever been in could sound better. Because there's only so far you can go, but you've got to go as far as you can with the room. And that will help you speed up your curve on learning the things you need to learn. You know, don't buy your way into it. Do some physics. You know.
Love the answer, bro. Okay, who has a question for Brian? I've got questions over here to the side. I've got all kinds of questions to ask him, but I want to make sure that I give you guys opportunities to ask. So, who has a question for Brian? Alexis.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, basically, you know, I just want to know if you know, if you had those many tours for a long time, and you know, what made you choose them among the thousands, the hundreds of tours out there?
Well, I'll be totally honest with you, because I'm a straight up guy. You know, I started out. Let's see. First things I bought when I was producing, tracking, what have you. BM6A's Dynaudio. Boy, I thought it was the greatest thing that ever happened. And a pair of Oratones. And the Oratone has evolved to the Aventone made in China, and I think that still is greatest trick since sliced bread is the Aventone. But I had BM6As. I thought they were amazing. I think from there, you know, I worked in some studios that had Genelec 1031s. So, oh, that's amazing. Then at home, I moved up to like the original Atom S3A, I think. Oh, that's even better. And then eventually, I basically along with other people online, I discovered Barefoot. I was the first Barefoot MM12 user on gear sluts in the early 2000s, saying to people, "This is the next big thing." And people said, "Who are you? Some guy in Ohio who never did a big record." You know, people made fun of me. I said, "No, this guy's somebody." And you know, before you do any record anyone's heard of, no one gives a shit what you think. So that's just how life works. But Thomas went on to do the MM27. Now he's got a whole line. And I used my MM12, which was a front-firing 12-inch with the two mids and the tweeter. I used that for 4 years, very happily. My career improved, my listening improved, everything got better. And then one day, and I say this with love and respect to Thomas, I just realized that he wasn't hearing all of the components of music that I was hearing. Like through discussions, I discovered that he doesn't hear cable tone. Cables have a sound, folks. I'm not going to argue with you, just telling you. Every cable sounds different. Doesn't mean it matters. Usually it doesn't, because it's way down the food chain. But it does matter. And then the dynamics of his driver, just not very dynamic. And I asked him about it. He's not concerned with the dynamic design. I became very concerned with harmonic content in a really subtle way. I became very concerned with dynamics in drivers, so that the emotion and the punch was really apparent in the room. without having to crank a speaker to get it to move air. So, and thirdly, the tweeter that he used, which is still basically what he uses, although it's evolved over time. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take the tweeter. So if we go back and look at the evolution for me, let's look at BM6As. Those are a disaster. I'm not even going to get into it. Then the S3A, low mid mess, the ribbon tweeter, it's two directional. It gives you really strong imaging. If you're of that mindset where you're like, oh, I love imaging, then you think it's the greatest thing ever, but it's not. You don't want to be there. You want to be in the middle ground. You don't want to be extreme imaging. You don't want to be no imaging. So I moved on from that. The low mids of that are a mess. The two drivers are weird. The barefoot was better. It was more even. It was more full range. It was kind of like a flatter NS10. That's what I used to call it. Like a full range kind of NS10. It had a slight 1K sort of mid clarity focus, but it gave you the full spectrum. But then it was, for me, lacking dynamics, lacking in some refinement harmonically, which comes back to, if the guy designing it doesn't hear cable tone, he's not going to bother too much with some elements of the sound that were important to me. So then I found just what I call, intuitive shopping. Google. And I just went around the universe of speakers until I saw something that struck my fancy. And something that strikes your fancy is a part of the evolution of being an engineer. You look at stuff and you get a feel for gear eventually, to be honest, by how it looks. If you've A/B'd enough stuff, you can look at gear because the aesthetic of the designer comes through in how they've designed the visual. So this is a whole other topic we won't get into, but I looked at these speakers and I thought, okay, I like the way they look, and then I did some study, and it was the tweeter in particular. The tweeter is a cloth surround with a titanium center. Well, generally speaking, we could call cloth the traditional tweeter design, and we could call any forms of metal, beryllium, titanium, whatever, we could call this a more modern thing, okay? I've never liked a metal tweeter in anything. Focals, $80,000 Wilsons, they all sound weird to me because harmonically they ring funny. It's like a steel drum. It's got a clang to it. And, Wilson, similar to Pro Tools, who for a decade said, our summing is fine, our summing is fine. And then new Pro Tools with improved summing, right? Wilson would improve these tweeters in their $60,000 speakers. So the new $80,000 pair, improved tweeter. Well, it's still a full metal tweeter. Focal, same problem, it's beryllium. What they have with these tweeters is titanium in the center with cloth on the outside. So down around 2K, 3K, 4K, 5K, that's where the cloth is. But up around, 15, that's where the metal kicks in. So it's almost like a four-way speaker. You've got woofer, mid-range, tweeter. And that seemed cool to me. I was like, oh, what a great idea. Why doesn't anyone else use that tweeter? And I'd never heard it. I just had a feeling. Got the speakers, really liked them, spent some time tuning the amplifier. I'm a big fan of passive speakers because it allows you to tune your amplifier. The Event 2020 and the Mackie HRR 824, whatever those were, I probably should have had those on the list too. I think I had a pair of Mackies before the BM6As, and maybe had some borrowed a friend's Event 2020s, but I could never listen to those. Anyway, when those came out, they changed the game, and people just plugged in an XLR cable and the power cable and was like, oh, this is awesome. Well, here's the dirty little secret. Over 20 years, the amps have gotten cheaper and cheaper. The whole thing has become corporatized in terms of price point, and we're all paying for a bunch of shit. That's the truth. With some exceptions. A few people make a nice amp, like the Boulder, that Unity people, they have a nice amp in there. But if an amplifier is in there and you're not seeing it and they can cheapen it, they will. That's just capitalism. Doesn't make these people bad, but it's a fact. So I like to pair the amp myself. I like to play with the amp as part of the sound. And I like Class A solid-state amps. I use tube amplifiers, very clean tube amplifiers in my setup, and I have for many years. So tubes are tricky. It's got to be clean enough. You've got to know what you're doing. You know, they fade over time. It's a real pain in the ass. But there is a palpable musicality and a physical sense of presence in my room that I guarantee you that you've never heard anywhere like you would hear in here. The people are literally floating right there. And it's very real. That's what I want. So I came to that by virtue of discovering Barefoot, promoting Barefoot before it was hip, getting sick of the tweeter, finding this company, and now I have 2 pair of these and 2 amplifiers, and like I said earlier, you know, eventually you get to a point where you're at the high end of the particular food chain, which works for the musical conveyance that you're doing. And when you find that, then you're good. Then you stop looking for gear. It's a beautiful day, but it takes a long freaking time. So that's my path, you know. What happens with speakers is you think it's the greatest thing ever until you realize it's not. What is it? Is it you that changed? Did the speaker change? Well, of course the speaker didn't change. So it is you that changed. Well, is it your hearing that changed? No. I mean, we're probably all getting deaf every day, so it's not that. But it's your conceiving of it. It's your thinking of it that changed. So people go through phases with speakers, you know. It's like there are all these stages you have to go to. You like the imaging speaker, you like the full range thing, you like the loud one, you like this one. To me, the important thing in speakers is, number one, that they suit the task. Tracking tool, different than mixing tool. Tracking tool's got to have power, it's got to have low mid-range for intimacy and feel to connect and inspire. Mixing tool has to be linear, but not too clinical. It still needs to be musical. It needs to be technically right and musically right. And then it has to work with your room. So I'll do another shameless plug. For years, people asked me to recommend a mixing speaker. If you're about to ask me, I'll stop you right now. I don't have one, except the parent company of what I use, they have a 2-way. And when people ask me now, I suggest those. But, you know, whether it be solo 6s or the latest from, you know, Amphion or Atom or whatever, too many caveats for me to explain to people and to think about their room. It's way too personal and interactive. I don't know where you are in your journey. I don't know what your room is. I don't know what you're doing. Those things all have to work together. But if I had one generic mixing tool recommendation, it would be the Spiral Groove Studio One. But anyway, does that help?
Yeah, sure. It's
Yeah.
always interesting to have, you know, different approach from people that have tried, you know, a few different things.
Yeah.
I don't know why, you know, I thought that you had the ATC, but
No.
I was confused.
No. These speakers also, I will say, I have a very different conception of a mastering room than most people. I like a small, intimate space, but the physics of that are wrong because the low end in a small space is a disaster.
Yeah.
So I like to sit, you know, I'm 7 feet. I'm in like a 7-foot triangle with my speakers. I can show you actually. They're right here. They are there. All right. And they are there. Right there. So in the near field, with a full range near field, which is basically what I have, the really dynamic nature of these drivers physically hits me in the chest. And I don't have to work at loud volumes. And the room here is a very novel room. It's very unusual. The room is only 12 by 15, but it's not really a room. I'm just freestanding on the ground floor of a 4-story structure. So, you know, this is the room, but if we go outside, this is the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
It goes up, and it goes up, and it goes up. So, you know, what's happening here is that I'm in a little room where I'm working close, and I've got a close back wall, and I've got fresh air and sunlight, which is lovely. I can crack the window, and if a client comes over, they're sitting 3 feet or 4 feet away from me. But the actual low-end, technical low-end volume of the room is gigantic. The room is actually huge because all the low-end is going through my wall traps, which are the real traps, 6-inch freestanding panels. It's going through those traps and out into the building. So in a mastering room, you've got to have a big space. The problem is, with a big space, usually people put in big speakers. So there are some, you know, well-known rooms here in town that I've been in. I couldn't work in them for 10 minutes because they've got a huge room which deals with the low-end issues. It cleans up the low end, but they want to be able to blast it for the client, so they've got like 2 or 3 12-inch drivers per side. Well, those aren't going to be very dynamic. Those aren't going to move very quickly. My 8-inch drivers move quickly, and that's technically better in my opinion. So it's a, you know, it's a journey. You got to find what works for you.
That's fucking cool.
Cool. Actually, yeah, thanks.
Who's next?
I got one for you. I'm really into iTunes or downloading MP3s, but when they put on a statement of mastered for iTunes, what exactly are they getting at?
Okay. Well, again, I'm going to have a unique opinion on this. I'll warn you. Mastered for iTunes it's a factual thing. It's a program that Apple did to, in principle, certify quality compliance. So a mastered for iTunes track has been mixed at 24 bits. It has been submitted at 24-bit to iTunes, and it has been run through a codec which is different than the normal iTunes, you know, 192 AAC that they sell. So mastered for iTunes is a 256, and they've got some proprietary math to make it sound better than the 192. So these things are facts. Okay, the next thing I'm going to say is my opinion. Many people are tweaking what they're sending to Apple, and they're charging for it like it's another product. It's like a mastering opportunity to make a buck, and or they might honestly believe that they're making it better by compensating for the codec. Okay? I experimented with this thing for 5 hours one day. I played with a 1-bar loop of music and some other music. I did every possible test. I don't think that tweaking it for the codec, A, I don't think it works. B, I don't think in principle it's the right move. I think it's the job of the codec to improve over time. And I think that, you know, when it comes to math and algorithms, they sound like they sound. So to me, the master for iTunes codec is cold harmonically and a bit thin, but it is technically better if you phase flip the file and compare it to the source. It's technically better than an MP3. But I personally would rather you listen to an MP3 that you make yourself of the 16-bit file that you buy on the CD, because the harmonic distortion is higher on the MP3, but the low end is retained, and where that distortion exists to me is in a better location, meaning it's enhancing the feel of the low end and the low mid-range. Low mid-range to me very important where intimacy is, low end very important, that's what moves drivers and makes people dance.
Gotcha.
So the AAC 256, which is mastered for iTunes, is in my opinion fucking those two very important components up, even though I absolutely concede that if I test it, it tests as closer to the source than a 256 or a 320 MP3. I'd rather you buy the CD and make a 320 MP3 at home. There's some killer MP3, software now. It's a math problem. So, I charge just a little bit of money for master for iTunes files because I'm not doing a whole lot to it, and I think that's fair. And I really hope they improve the codec. And I hope they just, soon our technology in this country improves. Japan, China, I mean, these countries are way ahead in terms of streaming ability. And, if we could just stream 24-bit files, it'd all be cool. I mean, frankly, you could stream 16-bit files would be fine. It'd be fine with me. 16 to 24 is a difference, but I'd be happy just streaming 16. That would be sufficient,
Yeah. What do you think about FLAC?
Well, I mean, can you be more specific?
I'm just curious on what your thoughts. I mean, I don't mess with those files at all. I'm just kind of curious on what you think about it. If you think they're better than CD quality.
Well, if you I'm going to skip the long technical answer. I'm going to keep it simple. If you listen to a CD at 16-bit 44.1 that was really well done, it sounds really, really, really good. If you listen to the 24-bit source of that, it sounds a hair better. A hair better. This depends a lot, though, on the style. If it's super dynamic classical music or super dynamic instrumental guitar vocal songwriter music, that's a whole different thing than if it's a pop track or a hip-hop track with a lot of electronic stuff. Or if it's a super loud, like, metal track from Germany. That stuff is slammed and sounds very digitized in its nature. So 24-bit or 16-bit, who cares? What really matters is what happens with the compression scheme to the harmonic content and to the frequency balance. So a 256 or a 320 taken from a 24-bit source sounds pretty darn good. I'd rather you hear the 24. I'd rather you hear the 16. But my concern with what I'm hearing out of Master for iTunes is that it's just a bit cold and a bit thin. I actually think it's like subjectively slightly shortens the bass note, which is slightly shortening the groove, which is like a giant loss. I would rather there be more distortion in the low end so that the tail end of the low end is maintained. I like music with a sexy groove. I don't want like a bunch of white guys at a wedding band. I want it to maintain that feeling. And my concern is that the guy there, bless his heart, I know it means the world to him because he knows he's sort of in charge of something very important. But I just don't think he's hearing certain elements that I consider very important to musicality.
Thank you.
But yeah, if it's like, the Pono player and that kind of stuff, I don't want to get into that too much because I think anybody who's trying to improve sound is good, even if it's a, funny shaped Toblerone bar that feels weird in your pocket. I mean, I'm all for it. But there isn't really improving on the source. There is the thing that I print that you approve. To me, that's the record. So increasing the numbers is often just one of these male penis measuring things. Not always, but 99 out of 100. It's not a numbers game. It's really about qualitative things, which can't be measured in numbers. You just hear them. And if you hear a high number thing and it feels and sounds great, and you compare it to the 16-bit CD, well, yeah, then it's better. But to me, like that's like icing on the cake. I mean, again, going back to Lenoir, Daniel Lenoir produced to DAT machine forever. Shit sounds great. If he can do it, you can do it. Those DAT machines didn't have very good converters in them. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. Musicality is not a numbers game. You know, the emotion of music is something that happens by the way that we interact with all these things. I mean, the Burl converters sound great, but they might not be the right thing for a record. You might want to use the metric halo converters. And that converter isn't going to make or break anything. That's just one choice in a long, long list of choices that you have to make. And every choice adds up. It's a game of inches, game of millimeters. And when you make a whole lot of good decisions, it sounds great. So that's really what's important. Just watch out for that numbers thing. It's commerce, and it's very male, and it makes me kind of frustrated. I think it's silly.
Cool. I really appreciate the information.
Sure thing, bro. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Chet Faker. Could you tell us about Chet Faker?
Yeah, Chet Faker, Australian artist. He's a DJ. Best that I can tell, I'm not his biographer here, but he was a DJ. He did a cover song where he sang a cover. It blew up on YouTube, and people were like, "We love your voice." And then he started writing songs over top of his electronic productions. And then I did a record for him last spring, which would be, we're in 15 now, so it was like January, February of 14. And I thought it was really interesting and cool. Eric J. Dubowski worked on it, and you know, it was a small Australian independent label, and I just thought, wow, this really stands out, you know. I hope somebody gets to hear it, you know. And then it ended up, unbeknownst to me, later I found out it opened up #1 on the Australian pop charts, and it went on to be nominated for 9 ARIA awards, which is the Australian Grammy equivalent, I guess you'd say. And it won 3, like Producer of the Year. I think Eric won and Chet won. His name's Nick, and he goes by Chet Faker, stage name. I don't know. I think it's a play on the Chet Baker thing, but I don't know. But it's really cool. It's like electronic with a soulful male voice. He sounds like an old soul to me. He's in his 20s, and he's got a really lovely tone and story component to his delivery. Cool stuff. I was happy. It's like when I heard the Black Keys Brothers records. You know, I mean, I told Dan, I said, I think this is a Grammy winner, you know. He was like, really? I'm like, yeah, man. I mean, my taste when I was younger used to be a little bit left of center, but now because I hear so much music all the time, you can just tell, you know, certain things are undeniably good. There are objectively true things about music production that, you know, I sort of hear so much that it's just become more and more clear to me every year. Certain stuff just has it. Style, not really that important.
You said tone. I used to hear guitar players say tone, tone, tone. I mean, they were just tone crazy, and I didn't get it. But now, like with all this singing, like most of my posts on Pensado Students now is singer stuff. I don't even post. Like engineering is, yeah, whatever, okay. I'm trying to get the source right. But like, say last night I'm listening to a mix that one of our guys did, and the singer's tone, the tone. I was in there. I started going into the vocal booth. We have a walk-in vocal booth now. It's like big, and I'll have a singer sing next to me at the console, and I'm hearing stuff that hurts my ears. I'm thinking it's the microphone or whatever. Right. And it's actually their tone. Yeah. So last night I'm listening and I'm like, this tone. Al Green came on after.
Right.
Hours. Al Green came on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. I mean, the tonal component is kind of my bread and butter. I mean, and I'm not trying to say that there are better or worse tones, but it has to link up. It has to resonate with what you're doing. So, you know, if you have a singer that has a 3K thing in their voice, you have options. You might deal with it with a microphone, or you might exploit it musically, and that becomes his or her thing. You know, but that tone has to resonate throughout the production. the tone of everything has to be congruent towards the artistic vision. And in mastering, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing, harmonic sculpture. I'm doing tone manipulation. I'm doing transience, frequency balance, and distortion. Those three things in a cocktail that suits the style, suits the artist, suits this moment in the artist's career. And it just has to be congruent. There's no good and bad tone. There's just good and bad combination of tonal qualities.
See, I'm sitting there hearing, I'm going, oh no, that's horrible. Like, it was hurting my ears, right? But
right.
You just said using the tone, like we would use the tone to our advantage musically. I didn't even think about that. All I could think of was getting the person to stop doing that tone or reduce it down to a level.
Right.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dig deeper into this. There's a time, in my opinion, to work on tone, to change it, and there's a time to not. So what would be the difference? Okay, let's take a hypothetical female singer who has spent a lot of time on stage, and they're now moving into an artistic career. So they sang covers on stage, and they have a strong artistic passion that they've been developing as a cover singer, and now they want to do original work. So this person has what? They have ability to be very powerful on stage, but they don't have as much of the ability to be intimate in front of a microphone. We think back to Bing Crosby. When the microphone was invented, that led to Bing Crosby because Bing can't sing loud. But his tone was very intimate and very connective. So the technology combined with the artist, combined with the style, is Bing Crosby. If Bing Crosby was going to go on stage and do theater shows, he would have flopped. So the technology and the artist and the style have to mesh. Let's look at Madonna. Madonna, same year as MTV, same year as the Eventide H3000, I think it was, with the original harmonizer, and you're doing some vocal tuning on this ambitious, energetic dancer chick who can't really sing, but she's visual, and she's sexy, and she's a strong woman, and she's interesting, and she's edgy, and we can put a camera on that. We can tweak her voice, and then we can exploit all those things into something that is successful. So there isn't a good or a bad. There's that it works together, or it's competing. Now let's take a competing example. You have a girl who wants to be Adele, because so many people do, or Amy Winehouse, and their natural tone just isn't in that ballpark at all. That's just not what they do. Now you have a moment where you have to look at the person and talk about it. But we're not talking about it from a tone standpoint. We're talking about it from a standpoint of artistic intention, identity, and honesty. Who are you? Are you a wannabe Adele, or are you the next Jane Doe Sexy? Because Jane Doe Sexy has her own thing. And we already have Adele. We have Amy. We need Jane Doe Sexy. And maybe Jane Doe Sexy has that nasal thing. Or maybe she doesn't, but that's a whole other discussion. You see what I mean? So if Jane Doe Sexy is trying to be Adele, and she's never going to be Adele, we have to work on her artistry. We're not necessarily working on her tone. But if Jane Doe Sexy has been on stage for a long time and she's conveying power with her 3K, then we say, hey, Jane Doe Sexy, you can be intimate now. You don't have to blow us out of the back of the room. You don't have to show off. Draw me in. You hear that little honk? You hear that little nasal? Change it. Can you change the shape of your mouth? There are things you can do with your mouth and your throat to change those tones. Because her subconscious thing is about power or being heard or noticed, which is a live thing. But now we want to move into intimacy. So she has some habits that we might want to talk about changing. So again, every situation is different. That was a complicated answer, but you get what I'm saying? The 3K thing might be perfect, or that might be her needing to become more intimate. Maybe she's fearing that intimacy because she's used to relying on her power, and that nasal thing is part of her conveyance of power. Is conveyance a word? I don't know. I just made that up. So it's all about making it work as a whole. And if the artist is trying to be someone they're not, well, that's got to be fixed. If the tone is left over from a live thing, well, that can be addressed. But to just say straight up, well, that's a weird tone for me, is an honest thing for you to say, because now you're feeling tone more. You're looking to resonate. And that's fact. But now you got to take it in the objective stage and say, well, what's going on with her? Why is she doing that? Is she forcing it? Is that honest for her or him? What have you? See what I mean? So back to the original point about there's the subjective component and the passion of us, and then there's the being a clear channel and being able to listen and get out of the way so that we can make smart decisions about encouraging the artistry. Both things have to happen at the same time. You've got to feel tone. Tone is huge. Tone to me is like a third of it. There's the tone of it, there's the structure of it, and there's the identity of it, which is the artist. The structure is in the production. The tone is in the production too. But the artist has a tone component too. But like to me, it's like, I don't know, I just pulled that number out of the air, but it's like about a third. I mean, in mastering, it's everything I do. It's tone to enhance connection. It's tone to enhance composition. It's tone to enhance identity and emotional connection of the artist with their largest audience. I mean, it's everything I do in here. But I think in the world, it's like about a third. You know, you take a thing that has an iffy tone, but great artistry and a great production, and you alter that tone, which again is what I do all the time. You alter it from really iffy to being really good. It's a huge thing. But even if you can increase it from being pretty good to better, it's really a big deal. It's kind of the way music feels as opposed to things that come later. You know, we feel music immediately, and the feeling is the tone. Before you decide that you like or don't like the song or the artist, you are attracted to or repulsed by the tone. It's very important. Again, it's what I do every day. But I think for everyone, it's more important, and that's you're feeling that. I mean, as a suburban white kid guitar player that grew up listening to blues albums, tone is like bread and butter there. Guitar players are tone guys. That's why we have all the pedals and all that. But pianos have tone, voices have tone, and it's a huge part. And it just has to be resonant with the whole production. Some people's like the Counting Crows guy. You know, he has kind of like a little bit of like a what you might call kind of like a whiny mid-range rasp, and that's kind of part of his folky storytelling charm. You know, or Chris Martin in Coldplay, he has a sibilance. He has a natural sibilance. There's a lot of s in a lot of his natural tone. And if you listen to that first record, which has got them going, which is still a timeless and beautiful record, some engineers might have taken that out. But that would have ruined some of his intimacy. That would have been a more fear-based or technically correct decision that would have missed out on something really important, I think. And it's a tone thing. So.
Okay. On Facebook, John, I hope I'm not murdering your name, Dyer Baker. He's
Oh.
Go ahead.
You
take it?
No,
If you got to take it, we can hold a conversation while you do it.
Well, do you want to pause it for a second?
Go ahead, bro. We'll just hold a conversation while you do your thing. Just mute yourself.
Yeah, it's a client. I'll be right back.
All right. Yoshida, are you there? I'm going to mute Brian here for a second. Nope. He's not there.
Check 1 2.
Who just did the mic?
That's me, Leon.
Yep. I was going to ask you, the stuff that he was saying just now. She's a singer. Some of the stuff that Okay, Leon, you're echoing again. Do you have Facebook?
Yeah, I'll mute. Okay, give me a sec.
Yeah, it's just Facebook going a little echo. So you have to get rid of your Facebook. Keep this going, but get rid of your Facebook. That's all. And okay, Yoshida's not there. Dominique, I did not mean to mute you.
That's what I do.
Yeah, that was totally accident. I asked him about Chet Fokker. There was somebody else that I wanted to ask him about. I'll find it.
Dude, how cool is his room idea? That's so cool.
Yeah. Let's see. No, we all that stuff he was saying about the tone and whatever. I spent years trying to take stuff out with EQ, compression, like really got into dynamic EQs, and some of the stuff was just so simple, like having the singer not produce that tone. Just like duh. But now that I've got it, I'm diving into the art of recording deep. It's just like the guys were saying in Pensado Students, so much easier when the issues aren't there. And so anyway, that's where I'm headed. Is having the issues not even be there. Let's see. John says I got it. Got his name right. You guys, he can't stay but so much longer, so you got to have your questions ready so he can knock them out. You see, he gives a thorough, honest, he answers thoroughly and honestly. Let's see, Marilyn Manson. I actually wanted to ask him about Marilyn Manson and I think it was Counting Crows or Black Keys, can't remember.
Ask him how often he's doing it in his undies versus how many times he's actually got clients there these days.
And boom, boom. Okay, Dominique, where are you at? Where are you located?
Me, Brizzy, Australia.
You're in Australia? That's the accent. Leon, you're down in L.A. Todd, where are you at? Oh, you're muted. Or I can't hear you, I should say, whether you're muted or not. Can't hear you, Todd. David, what part of the U.S. are you at? You in? Unmute yourself, David. Boston?
Beantown, baby. Can you hear me?
Yeah, and welcome, David. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too, man. Glad to be here. Nice ride in the pouring rain coming down from New Hampshire. Oh, man, forget about it.
Okay, Brian, I muted you while you were gone. I didn't want your conversation to be online, just in case. No telling what you would have said, so you got to unmute yourself.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
Good to have you, Boston. So, yeah, let's do a couple more.
Let's see. It was Brian Dyerbaker. Wants to know,
City.
Let's see. He wondered what headphones you rely on. He says, I'm reading what he posted on Facebook. He says, I live in an apartment and cannot turn up my monitors, and when I make a track on headphones, then go to monitors, it almost always sounds horrible, so I've been looking for a reliable pair.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's the headphone answer, right? There's all these topics, right? Well, headphones are a problem. There are better or worse headphones, but the main problem with headphones is that it's really confusing to the reality of music production. When we have two speakers, and you'll forgive me if this sounds like kindergarten, we have two speakers and they create a phantom image in the center, which is most of the music. The vocal, kick, bass, snare, I'm talking about pop music here. Then we have the side panned items you might refer to as the side or the spice, as I call it. Power and spice is my term, mid and side. When you have headphones, it's really confusing what's going on with that because it's just right up against your head. You're not actually creating an image in space, and you're not interacting with the room at all. And headphones are really, all of them, quite colorful. If you're gonna do that, I would say get a pair of Avantones. Again, I love those little Avantones because you can play them very quietly, and you can work on Avantones as your mid-range tool. And then for your full-range tool, a couple of options. The Sennheiser, I forget the numbers, like 500, 550. They have kind of a big oval cup. You know, it's pretty big. I mean, I use the 800s, but you don't have to go that far. What are these? HD 800 or something. You don't have to go to these are more HD 800, but you don't have to go there. You could go with I forget, but look it up. It's like decent Sennheiser phones. 500, 600, 650, somewhere in that range is the number, not the price. And the other one is the AKG, the 701, I think it is. It's kind of like a gray colored thing. Really neutral. Not as musical as the Sennheisers, but really kind of like the NS10 of headphones, if you will. Super dry, super kind of technically even. So I would look at, you know, maybe both of those. Get a Sennheiser and the 701s, and also get the Avantones. You know, you can play a mid-rangey thing at modest volume anywhere because there's no low end to go through the walls. Low end is the issue. Low end goes through apartment walls. Low end goes through the car. Low end is the subwoofer blowing you out, and that guy thinks it's perfect, and all you hear is thump. Low end goes through stuff. The Avantones, you know, die at about 100. They're like 14K down to about 100. So you can put them a meter in front of you, and you can do a lot of mixing on those. So again, I like a 3-speaker solution. I like a tracking speaker, a mixing speaker, and a full-range mixing and a mid-range mixing tool, like NS10 or Radio Shack Minimus 7s back in the day, or the Avantone, which is the old Ortone better. But for this one, you're going to do a headphone. So yeah, Sennheiser and AKG, those two. And obviously you're not doing any tracking because that would be even louder. Good luck with it.
When you say tracking speaker, give me an example of characteristics of a tracking speaker, and if you know any that you would actually want to use.
Bigger driver, low end bump, which is common to bigger driver speakers, and they can be old. They can be old and cheap. They could be 25-year-old JBLs or EVs from the pawn shop. You know, you don't have to get a pair of, you know, the new, what is it, the Events. Those would be good for tracking. They're horrible otherwise, but I mean, you don't have to spend $3,000 or whatever. You know, you can go down to the pawn shop. Just get something big and old, something that's got power and low end that feels good to people in the room.
Okay, and that was Shane Thomas Byrne, I'm not sure. The mastering speakers. What are the most expensive mastering speakers that you know of?
That people actually use production-wise?
Yeah.
Probably. I don't know. Maybe that Bruce dude. I forget his name. He always had some real high-end stuff. He was blinging it out. That was his game. I think they were Wilsons. Like, you know, you're talking like 40, 60 grand a pair, 80 grand a pair.
What price are we talking?
Maybe you didn't hear. I was just saying, like, you know, anywhere from 20 to 80 grand a pair, that kind of price.
Okay, yeah.
But you don't have to go there. That's not necessary.
So $80,000 for a pair of speakers. What on earth could somebody get out of that?
Well, I don't think they're better than what I use here. And what I use, you know, you could buy new now for 12. I think I paid $6,000 for the pair. So I don't think they're better. They're bigger. They're more powerful. They look fancy. They fill up a giant room. but they're not better. Again, you've got to throw out this, we're all capitalists and most of us are men, and we get caught up in numbers and money. It's not about that. It's really about performance and appropriateness for the space and the job at hand. So you want something that's full range and appropriate for how you hear music. Every mastering room is set up differently. They're set up to the taste of the engineer. They're set up to the things that work for that person's workflow, just like the EQ they use. It's a piece of the workflow. It has to be at a certain high level, but there isn't like, oh, I can buy my way into being a better engineer. You can't buy your way into being a better engineer. Unless you're buying some bass traps for your room, I would probably say that would help. But other than that, it's not something you can buy your way into. So they're not better. They're just different.
Okay, $80,000. All right. Well, John says thank you. He didn't know about the Avantones. He didn't know that he could do that with the Avantones and that would work.
Well, yeah, John, and you weren't here earlier. I'm a fan. I've been telling people to buy those puppies forever because I used to mix with the Oratone, and it's just a Chinese-made sort of Oratone on steroids. They took 200, knocked it down to 5 or 6, ended up making this one speaker that encapsulated the best qualities of the 5 or 6, and I like them passive. Any amp will do. You get like a Samson servo amp, or you can get a nice amp, or a 20-year-old Yamaha amp. I don't care. The amp is probably any old or new cheap amp I would like better than their Class D amp, so I say that respectfully to them. I don't like the amp. But the speakers are great. They do need break-in. They're not going to sound like infinitely better, but they will improve. They're pretty tight out of the box, and yeah, that's a nice tool for the rest of your life. If you're a mixer, and you know me, I've told you buy a pair of those and keep them forever, because you can start and end your mix on them in any room, and you always know what you're doing. You always get where's the vocal, where's the snare, where's the kick, where's the panning, where's the low end build-up, where's the, there's too much low end on it, it's too fat. If they're bright, it's too bright, because it's a very smooth mid-range thing, like 100 to about 14K. Very even, no crossover, no port, no bullshit, no big bouncing off the walls. Just right in front of you and pan and go. You can aggressively EQ on them, then use your headphones to fine-tune, and then at the very end come back to the little mid-rangey ones, just like people would use an NS10, but I like them way better. NS10s require being trained on them by someone who knows. It's not a speaker for the faint of heart or the novice. It's not going to make your work better. So many people today, like, oh, I've seen these NS10s for 30 years. Clear Mountain and all these people, they started this trend, and they go buy them, and then they make horrible mixes. They're a disaster. They're hard to learn. Just don't do it. That's my recommendation. Get some Aventone.
Okay, anybody else have a question for him?
I was just going to say, I got gotten a pair of the HS5s by Yamaha, and supposedly the settings on the back, and you can set them to be the equivalent, supposedly, of the NS10s. And I'll tell you, I hated these things. It took me like over a year to learn them. They're really good in detail and, for the center mid-range. But I wasn't used to mixing with those type of monitors. I was used to having monitors that had more color to them and low end. Ouch.
Yeah, it's nothing's ever the same, but it is in the ballpark, but that ballpark is a very specific kind of mid-forward thing, and it really does take training yourself like you've done, or working in a room with someone more experienced where you learn them. But it's no silver bullet. In fact, it usually makes people go backwards, because they end up, if you're new to mixing, and I'm assuming that a lot of people listening are on the new end, you mix by feel, and that speaker is not a speaker you could ever mix by feel on. You mix by feel, you blow up the bottom end, scoop the mids because it over pushes it. They're too bright. It's a mess. It's a disaster. But the Aventone, you can learn it quicker. It still takes some brain power, but you learn it quicker.
Is that it? You done, David?
Yeah, that was just tossing that out there.
All right, Dominique, did you have a question?
Yeah. So the one thing I always wanted to ask about these things is like business stuff. So what's the one thing when you are maybe early off in your business or even now in your business? What's the one business tip that you would give to engineers? Because I mean, when we get to the sort of stuff that we do, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm a owner operator, so I do all my accounting and finance and all that sort of stuff. So what's your one business tip that you would give to up and comers starting their own business?
Well, the one business tip. Sorry if I froze there for a minute. I was just doing a quick search. The one business tip. It's a good question. Well, I don't know. To me, maybe a little longer answer because I'm just long-winded. You forgive me. I think that if people are in the music business from a business perspective, they're in the wrong business. That's the first thing. So if you're thinking of it that way, you do something else. If you're in it for musical reasons and then you're trying to figure out how to do business, which is where you're coming from, I think it's important to apply the same principles that have always applied to business, which is basically to treat people the way that you would want to be treated and to be sure and provide value and service. At the end of the day, my clients are my advertising. I got to be known for doing records by doing other records. And all of the referrals are what has paid my bills for 15, 16 years. So you have to find a professional way to deal with people where you don't run yourself into the ground trying to chase their emotions, but you provide a service and respect and value that is a win-win. And that's the bottom line, isn't it? It's got to be a win-win. You've got to feel like, well, what if I was that guy? If a major corporation comes to me and says, yeah, we've got 3,000 for this record, I know that's not the case. That's a person trying to shave a little so they get a bonus at Christmas. But if a guy comes to me and says, I work at Starbucks and I have $800 for this record, I know that's probably not the case either. He might have 15 if he knew the value in it. And that major record is probably a $6,000 or $8,000 record, So I want to be respected by you, but I also want to provide you a fair value, and it needs to go both ways. It's a trade. It's all a trade. Cash is the currency by which we value the trade of time and goods and services. So you want to feel like you're being respected for what you're doing, and you want to feel like you're respecting them. And if both parties feel they're winning, you're going to succeed in the business of music. If you take a day off and if you get greedy, or you take a day off, or whatever, you're going to lose. It's going to hurt you later. I mean, I have a little piece of those little Dymo sticker tapes that you make your own labels, label maker, on my internet computer that says each email an honor. I look at it every day. And I have one on my music computer that says every single is important. I was going to say each, but it's not. It's every single important. Each record a career. So that's my mindset. You didn't have to email me to talk about music. We're not curing cancer here. We're not putting a roof on the house or bringing internet to the poor. This is a fun gig. We are fortunate to be changing money over music making. So I feel honored with each contact. But if they don't honor me back with respect, then I have to toughen it up a little bit, you know? So it has to be a win-win. And I do each record as if it's a calling card, as if that's the only thing of mine you've ever heard. Because, you know, before I had done some of these popular records, that's how it worked, and that's just how I do it. You know, if I take a day off on your record that's going to sell 500, you're going to feel like, oh, well, he doesn't give a shit about me. And I'm not going to name names, but there are a lot of mastering engineers who don't work that way. They value the record based on how successful it might be, based on what kind of momentum it's going to give them in return. Well, I think that's a shitty thing to do, and it's not the way I want to live. I want to live going to bed every night that I kicked ass for everyone, and that they were cool back to me. And if they weren't, I stood up for myself, and we made sure that we both ended happy. So it's a long answer, but that's how I do business.
I was on mute. That was a cool answer. Thanks, Steve.
Absolutely. All right, anybody else? Let's give it 10 more minutes, unless we're done. Maybe we're done. Here's the link to those spiral group monitors if anybody cares. Anything else? Mastering question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Hopefully without any, like, distortion or weirdness.
No, that sounds good.
So you were talking about earlier where you were polishing turds and you kind of realized that you wanted to kind of understand mastering better, so you sought out answers, and so you decided to take it on yourself, and you got frustrated by kind of the technical jargon you'd get. So my question is, after you started to develop your sound and you started to understand mastering at large, and you started really getting confident in your mixing and mastering skills, at what point in that journey did you begin to take on clients? What was it? Was it a point that you reached in your quality based on your own ears, or was it a point where you heard, you got a lot of maybe feedback from others that let you know that you were mixing to an ability where you could actually bill for your services?
Right. Well, okay. First answer here is, like, in a sense, I'm going to tell you more about me, but in a sense, what I did doesn't matter because it's a different era, and you're a different person in a different place. So I'm not ignoring your question, but everybody's story is different. You know, we're in a different time in 2015 than we were in, 1996 when I first started doing production at home. I was a musician in a town where people knew me, my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, that I love dearly, and I was known as a musician in town. So I'd, record a friend's band or whatever, and, I'd get paid a little something. I get like $20 an hour or something, just fair value. Now, the era we're in now, everybody has a studio because everyone has a laptop. So it is much harder to even get $20 an hour because they just go do it themselves because you don't know any more than they do. So on a certain level, I don't know that I can answer this for you very well. I'm going to try out of respect to you, but you're going to have to find an organic path to this because it is a different time. We've been in this DIY era now for a decade, I guess, decade and a half. Yeah, decade and a half. Computers, software, mic pre's, go. Oh, I'm an engineer. It's like here in LA, everyone's a TV producer. No, you're not. You're a jackass, but they think they're a TV producer. So, we're in that era where everyone does it. So, my thought on this is that I didn't mention in the previous question about a recommendation, but I'm going to recommend it here. It's no crime to not make money from music. I never set out to make money from music. Never. I'm fortunate to make good money now, but that's because I have a value. I have a clear and unique value in the world that people recognize. That's a beautiful thing for me. I feel very fortunate. But I didn't go after that, per se. I went after musical ideas that I was passionate about. And I had a day job. And a day job is a beautiful thing, because if you have the right day job, which I define as one that doesn't drain you spiritually or physically, where you can come home and be passionate without anybody getting in your way to do what it is that you're driven to do, you can develop that thing which is uniquely yours, and the value of it will eventually be seen. So it's a bit, to me, of an inorganic question, when do I charge? Because you have to figure that out for your situation in life, and we're in this different world. But what's really important isn't that. What's really important is that you don't look at it as music production or music for money. I personally think that's the death knell of everything in music. I personally think that you have to allow yourself space and time to explore what you're passionate about, to build those skills until you have a unique voice, whether it be as a producer, an artist, a mixing engineer. I mean, mastering is tougher. I wouldn't go into that. We're gonna kick your ass. Don't do it. No, but it's just not. You're not ready. You know, I believe that mastering is something that's best learned down the line. You know, I mean, some people do well learning in school, but I think it's best down the line. But I'm getting a little off the point. But you feel what I'm saying? Like have a job that doesn't kill you, and come home and do your thing, and the money has to organically work out with your town and your friends and your peers and your passion. Your passion has to drive what you do. Everybody wants to get paid, but here's the secret in life. You never really get what you deserve. Like my friend, I won't name names. I have a friend that works with a huge band. He comes in and does. He plays an instrument. Okay, he's not in the band. He plays an instrument. And I bet there are times that he thinks, I didn't get paid enough for this. And I know there are times that his band that he works with, when he works with hundreds, but these bands that he works with, I know, because I've heard these people talk. They're like, damn, those labels, they are fleecing us. They are fleecing us. They're making the money. They're making no risk. And this is a person with many millions of dollars. So the truth and the secret is that you never get what you're really worth. You're just happy to be in the game. And so, you know, you don't let yourself get walked on, but the evolving value has to be based on, you know, market rates. If there are other people doing what you do, you should be where they are, and if you're new, you're a little under where they are, you know? And if no one's getting paid for what you do, then, well, you probably won't get paid either, you know? So passion has to guide you. Have a day job. Develop your unique strength and power. You know, you weren't born to be average. You were born to be uniquely interesting and valuable. Develop that in the privacy of your own space and time, and then let the currency part work out. But realize that you're always going to feel like you're not quite getting what you added to that thing. I mean, unless you fleece somebody in some deal, you know, I don't deal with those people, but most people I deal with always feel like I did more than I got paid for. But to be honest, I think that's why you are successful, because you served, you know? I mean, I'm sure Kanye goes home at night and it's like, damn, I should have made more at that gig. This is a bitch. I want to go home and F my wife, you know? It doesn't matter who you are. You always sort of feel like you're getting shorted. And so you have to work with that. You have to know that's what it is going in. And you have to let your passion for what you're doing guide what you're doing, and then find people who connect with that value by being passionate. I don't know if that helps, but that's all I got.
No, that definitely helped. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Okay. I have here the requirements to work at a high level, what it takes to be long in the room with high-level people. Could you speak on that?
Well, you got to listen, and you got to be cool. You've got to listen and be cool. And by being cool, I mean respectful and have something of value in that room. You know, you're in the room that you belong in. That's the truth of it. We're all where we belong. We're where we are where we are. We can't ambition our way up the ladder, really. I mean, some people do, but if you're asking me for advice, I'm not going to give you that advice. My advice is, you know, you are invited into the other rooms by people who see the value that you exhibited in the room you were in. So you have to be very present in the moment of what you're doing. You know, when I used to do records, 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 years, 2001. Before the Black Keys Brothers record, which was the first really big record that I did, I put the following energy into every project. A, I'm going to give them more than they're paying for or expected. B, I'm going to do this in such a way that they're excited to tell their friends. And C, I'm going to hope that someone hears this further up the food chain. That was it. Every job, every day. I'm going to serve and provide with value. I'm going to excite them to share my name and my work. And I'm going to hope, not control, not market. I'm just going to hope in my heart that someone notices and I get invited into the next room. And, you know, because I felt like I had, you know, I had something of value. I felt like that the mastering that was out there ran the gamut from good to mediocre to avoid, but I felt like I had something different that was at a high level. And it was just a question of, did people resonate with what I had to do, what I had to offer, or did they not resonate? And then how far up the food chain would that resonate? But that didn't happen when I bought my M-Box and just started. That happened after you know, decades of being a musician and a decade of engineering and making records, and you know, it takes time. It takes time. And I had a day job for most of my life. I mean, really. I mean, I was a full-time musician at 18. I was playing covers, and I made the decision that, well, I could keep playing covers. I could stay in these safe gigs. You know, you can go do live sound your whole life. That's a fine gig. But if you have a desire to be on some other level, you're never going to get there by doing live sound. So that's kind of like playing covers as a musician. You can play covers, that's a gig. You can have people love you. You can make a lot of money doing covers. But you're never going to evolve your own artistic thing and be recognized for who you are by doing that. So I stopped doing that when I was like 21. I stopped making the easy money, and I got a job. And I started working on myself as an artist before I was working on myself as an engineer. And that all led to having the value that people perceive that I have today. So that's a journey. It's not quick, but it's a good one. You know. And there's no crime in a day job. You know, we live in this world now where, you know, the last 10 years they interview college kids and they're like, you know, well, before the crash of 2008, let me just say, 8 out of 10 were like, we're going to be millionaires by 30. You know, that's kind of this sort of narcissistic world that we've been in. Then the crash happened. Now people are just like, shit, I hope I can get a job. You know, now we're recovering now, but things have changed a lot. But in the 2000 to 2007 era, you know, it was like, I'm going to be Jay-Z. You know, like, well, no, Jay-Z's Jay-Z. You're going to be you if you set out to be you. If you try to be that other guy, you'll never be you. So don't do that. To me, it's a waste of time. Don't compare yourself to people. Do what you do. Develop what you do. And be proud to have a day job. There's no crime in that. Some of the happiest people I know work at 7-Eleven. They don't give a fuck. They're in there talking about whatever, and they go home, and that's cool. You know? So if you have some kind of job that allows you to develop, eventually the value will be clear. It takes time. But your job isn't to be worried about how much recognition you're getting. Your job is to worry about how much ass you're kicking at what you do. That's what you can control. The rest of it you can't control. There's no point in even thinking about it. How people perceive you or talk about you when you're not around, you will never know. But if you infuse something really powerful into the work that you do, something valuable, something that serves, something that inspires, I can guarantee you that people will be talking about you when you're not around. And you'll hear nice things like I hear, like, oh, I've heard a lot about you. That's what that is. You can't control it except by what you do, and you 100% control what you do. So work on that.
Okay, Crossbone T, Facebook. He wants to know about apparent loudness. Not necessarily squashing the mix or whatever, but just apparent loudness.
Be more specific. What is apparent loudness? I mean, it could be the mid-range that's slamming. It could be low end. I mean, there's a balance of things. It's a cocktail. If it's too compressed, it doesn't sound loud. If it's not compressed enough, you can't push it before clipping into audible distortion. So there's a balance. Loudness it's a cocktail. It's harmonic distortion. It's frequency balance. It's transient to compressed balance. Those three things I mentioned earlier, if you weren't here, that define the sphere, which to me is the world of mastering. I'm dealing with three things, like an X, Y, Z graph. Frequency balance, harmonic distortion, and transience. You do those right, it's loud. I make very loud records that move air when needed. Most of the time with a client, I default to something pretty loud, but I don't compress. I try not to. I compress a dB at most ever. You can EQ out a lot of the problems. It's mostly EQing. You got to have the room for that, and you got to know what you're doing. And so, what is it really? It's really having like a musical vision and perspective, to be able to hear into the music, to be able to hear into the production, to be able to make the right decisions. You know, EQ, limiting, compression, and maybe some expanding at times. That's it. You know, there's not much else to mastering, but it's the doing of it a certain way that's the trick, because it's a subtle world with dire consequences. You know, it's forever.
So quite a bit of loudness can be achieved with subtle moves.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to answer this. I mean, loudness is partly built in the production. It's built into the tracking. It's built into the arrangement. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of answer. You know, decent tracking quality can be overcome by amazing production. Great tracking quality can be mitigated by mediocre production. Everything plays together. It's a balance of factors. But it all starts with the tracking. It starts before that with the arrangement. It starts before that with the initial inspiration, what people call talent, what I would call the quality of inspiration and the ability to deliver it. So those things all play into it. But technically speaking, by the time I get it, yeah, it's frequency balancing, it's compression to transient balancing, and to some extent harmonic distortion factors in. I don't know if that's what you were thinking, but that's what
it helps. Okay, now he's in his cheap setup, cheap speakers, like you just went over and spoke about that. And he's looking at getting the IRK multimedia, the IRC. Is it
let me look it up. I'm not up on all the new gear.
I'm supposed to know this. Hold on.
You IDK?
The ARK.
Oh.
You know what I mean? The where you shoot the room with a mic, you shoot the room with sound, and then the mic picks it up and it takes a frequency response.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, no, I didn't know what that was, but I know the concept. Okay, here's the deal with that. That ain't gonna work. It's not gonna work. Why? Why isn't it gonna work? Well, the head of your microphone is this big. Okay, your ears are this far apart, and tuning the room electronically creates some other issues on the phase end generally, although now we have phase linear stuff. It's a total band-aid, okay? The better thing to do is treat the room and improve the monitoring. So you can do that as a band-aid, but I've never done it in any room ever, and I don't know anyone who uses that, me personally. There are people smarter than me who could go on in greater detail about why it doesn't work, but the main issue is you're dealing with a size like of the head of a pin or a pen cap, and you're treating EQ. You're not dealing with time response. I mean, speakers are more than EQ. They're not just a frequency generator. They have distortion, they have phase, they have all these other qualities that are part of what they do. So you're basically saying, oh, a speaker puts out a frequency balance. It's basically like an EQ machine. I'm going to re-EQ it, and I'm going to have a better speaker. Not really the point. You're not understanding what speakers do. There's a whole lot more going on. You're not changing a lot of important components, and you're not changing the room at all. It's much better to change the room with any speaker you have, first, second, and third thing. Bass trap the shit out of your small rooms at home. Get your first reflection points to be dried. Absorb the first reflection. Diffusion is not for you. It's icing on the cake for better rooms. Bass trapping and first reflection points, that's a good start. And that'll make any speaker better. But then it's just a question of what speaker do you have? Most of them are a compromise of tracking and mixing, and most of them basically suck. That's my take. You can learn around things to some extent, but if your room is awesome, that's a head start. You can't learn around a bad speaker in a bad room by buying a plugin. It ain't gonna work. I don't recommend it. You know, you can't buy your way into success except in room treatment. Room treatment and monitoring are the two places where everyone should spend money and doesn't. We want a plug-in and a preamp. Microphones are important. Microphones are important, but the room and the monitoring is even more important. If you gave me a bunch of 60s era, you know, Unidyne 357s, which is like the 535 SDs, the switch dynamics that are one of my favorite little dynamic mics. If you gave me a bunch of those and put me in a great room with monitors I knew, my shit would kick your ass. And the same goes for anyone who's really good at engineering things. The room and the monitors are way bigger than anybody thinks. So have fun with your plugin, but it's a major band-aid. I would really spend money on the room and on the speakers and the placement in the room. By moving things 2 inches and 4 inches, you can activate the room so differently. You can pivot, you can go back and forth, you can go up and down. You're basically trying to cheat against all the bullshit in your room by placement plus your location. To me, that's the better cheat than the EQ thing with the software. Play with the placement a lot. Little movements. Get yourself 10 or 12 ref tracks that you feel like you have a sense of what they sound like and that they're all great, technically great. Get those things sounding great in your room by moving stuff around. Because when you move it around, you're literally like reshaping the acoustic signature of the room. More or less depending on the speaker. Ported speaker more, you know, different speak, you know, the beamy tweeter. There's all these different things that play into that. But I think the first thing to do is move stuff around and have someone there with you to help you and really play with that.
You said arrangement will help with loudness. Would you give examples, please?
Well, I mean, it's pretty common in producer circles. Like the power of the mix comes from the arrangement and then the way that it's mixed. So if you have just a lot of messy low mid range, and that comes in the verse, then you go to the chorus. How are you gonna step it up for the chorus? There's going to be no sense of impact because you don't have any center definition. Meanwhile, if you have a arrangement which is a piano and a vocal in a verse, and the drums come in the chorus or the pre-chorus with a shaker or whatever, and then the chorus, in comes the drums and a synth or a guitar or whatever, the power is in the arrangement. It's very easy to make that into a powerful, loud thing. Now you just have to deal with the technicalities of how to compress and EQ those elements, because emotionally you're building parts. You're building up. So when you have stuff that's side panned under 500 hertz that's a mess, that's always getting in the way of the punch. But maybe it's appropriate. Maybe your Arcade Fire. Or maybe your Destiny's Child. It's not appropriate. The wide panned low end stuff is alternative music. The deep V shape is pop music. And everything in between is a stylistic subconscious trigger to the listener. So the arrangement needs to build in such a way that the power elements come through, and then they can be mixed. If the arrangement's a big mess, where's the power in that mix? It's very hard to come by. And then if you overcompress it because you already had too many elements and there was too much low end in the elements or too much low end in the side pan elements where the kick and the bass were overwhelmed, now you're trying to overcompress that to make up for the fact that it's messy. So now you have a messy arrangement and you've compounded it by overcompressing it. And then you don't have a good mastering engineer, so you're afraid that they're not going to be loud enough. So then you overcompress it even further. And then you've boosted the kick at the very end to make sure the kick doesn't get lost. That's a disaster. That's all a disaster. And this happens all the time. Make the arrangement build nicely. Make the power in the mix make the right shape of a V in the low end to support the style. Have the dynamics from part to part increase slightly but not dramatically, and send it to someone to master who respects that and takes it to another level. That's a loud record. That's a good loud record. Those happen all the time too.
Does anybody have any questions? And Raj, I'm not sure how to say your name, but if you have a question, time to unmute and ask him, because he's going to have to go in a little while. Nope. Okay. Does anybody else have a question before I ask this next one?
No, I'll say real quick something, but I don't want to interrupt.
Okay, go ahead.
What David was saying, Brian reminded me of premix eras when I was young and listened to music enjoyingly. Move speakers around for the different projections of audio pleasure. Yeah, enjoy the process. This is an esoteric thought. It's a deep thought, but I believe this to be a fact. Music is simply the combined energy of all the people who worked on it. The inspiration of the artist, the energy of the mixer, the tracking engineer, the vibe in the room on a given day, my vibe when I master it or someone else's when they do it. The energy of these people is infused in vibrations that come out of speakers, and we call it music. So if you're not enjoying the process, you're not making good music, because no one's going to enjoy listening to you suffer or be technically perfectionistic or fearful or ambitious, unless it's an ambitious music, like certain hip-hop, which speaks to the ambition that people have. That's a different thing. But skipping that, generally speaking, you're looking for like a kind of a community enjoyment vibe from music. And so the process has to engage people in the right emotional way. And that's what I, preach, is to understand that everyone matters. The artist, the tracking guy, the mastering guy, everyone's energy ends up being heard in the end. So definitely move those speakers and listen to music for enjoyment. Rediscover your passion for music all the time. Sometimes I'll get tired. I'm fortunate to be very busy. I'll get burnt out, and I'll take a day and I'll do something. I'll go get passionate about cars, or I'll go do something with my girlfriend at the movies, and we'll see something emotional, and I'll cry at the movie or something. And I come back to the studio and I find the passion in the music, because if I'm not bringing that to it, my work's going to come across flat to you. So by all means, enjoy the process and rekindle your passion at all times, because that's energetically infused into where you set that compressor, into which mic pre you choose, and to how you mix that track. That's what people are feeling from you, not just when they're with you, but when they hear your work. They feel you.
Okay, would you please speak on your work, Grace Potter?
New record coming out soon. Eric Valentine, producer. Grace and Eric worked on it for like 6 months. She's kind of gone solo, I guess. A new turn in her career. It's a little more pop, but it's a little more, I think, honest artistic evolution for her. I don't speak for her, and she didn't tell me this, but from what I garnered for them, she's real excited about it. And this is like, you know, she's had some kind of pop successes, but still with the kind of rootsy components, which are their songwriting home base. And that's a cool record. It should be out soon, maybe in the fall. Dan Auerbach solo record. Pat Carney and the Black Keys hurt himself. Dan had some time. He whipped out a solo record coming out of a tough divorce, well publicized. Got in the studio with some friends of his and did some really interesting things. That'll be out soon. I'm really excited about that. Again, these are just the big records. I do, 4 or 5 records a week that are less known, but and the Manson record that came out recently, I'm very proud of. It's really solid artistically. It's not like industrial video game music in any way. It's like a real artistic statement from someone in midlife who's got a seriously intense artistic voice and something very clear to say that's never been said more clearly, both lyrically and in the music production. And the sonics of it are undeniable. I mean, it is done to a click, but it's all real instruments. And so it really, that click element is that's kind of the Manson-esque solidity of it. But then there's all this organic, almost soulful, guitar, bass, drum kind of rock stuff. Distorted bass and, really cool. And his vocal he'll just kill you. And I love what I did, and I love what everyone did, and I think that's a really exciting record. No one who's ever heard that one, which is out already. I think it just went up over 100,000 sold, so they're happy. It keeps moving up and up. And everyone who's heard it here is just like undeniable. That, like I said earlier, there's an objective, undeniable thing in music production that you can do no matter what your style. You eventually will get to that point where you hear that simple things are more powerful, and that the construction of the arrangement is a universal thing, and that the artistic connection is built on the honesty of the artist who has something to say, and then we help them say it. Those things equal success. It's not like you need to be on a label or know somebody. That's like, holy shit, that's awesome. There's certain objective things that I can notice now because I hear so many records. And these records all have it in different ways.
And the Black Keys.
Yeah. Well, their recent record was a year ago now. It was Turn Blue. That was my 3rd record with them, with Chad Blake. Chad's a real interesting mixer. He's real creative. All in the box. One of the world's biggest kind of creative in the box proponents. He's got a lot of stuff online. He's a good guy to listen to if you're looking for ideas. He starts with a lot of left, center, right, kind of old school cardinal points panning, as it's sometimes called. There are other people who have talked about that old school concept when consoles just had a switch. They had an LCR switch. So yeah, Chad does some neat things. He's all in the box. He used to work at Real World, which was Gabriel's place. Now he's in his basement in Wales with his wife and family, and he goes down there and hits recall and pulls it up and goes at it.
Well, how was it challenging? Like when you get one of his mixes, how is that challenging compared to the everyone else's mixes?
Well, everyone's mixes are different. Chad's stuff, he uses a lot of limiting, he uses a lot of distortion, he uses a lot of creative panning and effects. He's really quite the sculptor. There's not a lot of respect for the source in what he does. There's a lot of infused energy in what he does.
A lot of energy?
Infused energy from him.
Okay.
He messes with everything. That's his thing. And when you mess with everything and you've got good taste, then you're Chad Blake. You end up having a sound. So his stuff is very well controlled all the way through. It's got big low end. I usually make it even bigger, which always shocks everybody. Yeah, his stuff is great. I mean, it's section to section. It moves the right way. He uses limiting, but he doesn't overdo it. He uses decapitator on almost every channel, I think, and sans amp, but he knows how to do it. And he's got great monitoring, and he's got 30 years of working at a really high level, and he's really got a strong musicality. And musicality, at the end of the day, to me, is everything. Whether you're doing songwriter music or hip hop music or pop country or whatever, the musicality that's that part that comes from inside of you that you bring to the project. So developing your musicality, listening better, being a better musician, being a better appreciator of other styles, whatever it is that expands your musicality is just as important or more important, really, than anything technical. Because if you can't hear it in your head, you can't make it happen. You've got to hear it in your head. So everybody hears things. They just have to listen to what they hear, what resonates with them, and then work with that. Resonate that inside yourself with your technical skill, and then hopefully over time you work with people who vibe with more and more with what you're into. Like, I like intimacy in music. I like low end. I like low mid range. That's full. Like the 90s was like 90s rock radio to me was like the low point in all of production. I don't like over-compressed, mid-rangey, plasticky sounding music. I like music that can be loud, but it has to move a driver. And I like low mids that are intimate, and I like a certain harmonic content that sparkles in the vocal. You hear the spit in the back of the throat, and the top end sort of falls gently, isn't dark but isn't bright, sort of falls like 15 nips tape, 2-inch 16, has a soft fall like I used to produce records on 2-inch 16. So, I mean, that's what I do in mastering, So you got to find that thing you love, develop that thing you love, and then people will connect with you that hear it and resonate. Chad and I are very resonant, and obviously the Black Keys and Chad and I have now done three records that are considered quite strong, and I'm very proud of those. Great team. It's all about team. No team, no nothing.
Mix engineers often look up to mastering engineers, turn to them for like help, advice. How have you noticed that mastering engineers screw up mix engineers?
Yeah, well, all I hear is secondhand, right? So, yeah. Well, we can even say, I mean, even Chad, I don't think he would mind. When I first did Brothers, he said, do you want me to send you all these mixes down a dB? Because I have, I think, 4 limiters on the 2 mix, and people have said it's too much, and they've told me to send something else. And I was like, let me get this straight. I haven't heard this yet. You, Chad Blake, has been doing amazing stuff since the 80s, and you, Dan Auerbach, who I respect and love as a person I've known for a couple years, you've got a record you're excited about, and you want to know if I, Brian Lucey, who hasn't heard it, wants you to do something with the mixes that you all approved. Does that seem crazy to anyone? It did to me. I said, no, I want to hear what you like. Whatever the other guy said, fuck the other guy. You're not using him anymore. I want to hear what you love. He said, well, he's very respectful and sweet, Chad. He said, no, I'll send them to you just so you can hear it. So he sent everything down a dB, 1 dB, 10 tenths. To me, it was ruined. It actually sounded worse because it was just not what they heard. it did sound over limited at that point. It did sound like wallpaper. It wasn't the vision. It didn't sparkle. It didn't bring me to life as I listened. Just like it didn't bring them to life, or that would have been the mix, you know? So the one that brings you alive in the room, assuming the room is decent and you're all on the same page, that's the one I want. So a lot of mastering engineers give people advice away from this concept that I give advice from, which is turn up the volume, enjoy the process, make amazing singles, do not fear the loudness, do not fear them flowing together, do not overcompensate kick, snare, vocal, anything for me. Make a mix in the room that's awesome. Make it move dynamically part to part, just enough, not too much, but just enough for the style. Yes, you can compare it to mastered things, but not at the same volume. And no, you don't have to match the overall frequency balance of the mastered thing. I can tweak that. Work on the relationships, track to track, kick to bass to synth part to guitar part to vocal to layers to relationships are where your power lies. Overview is not your job in mixing. Overview you've hopefully taken care of by getting a decent sounding room, learning your monitors. That's your overview thing. But comparison outside of that can go way too far. Because what happens is, as you make your mix more technically right, you are fucking up the unique musical thing that makes it interesting. And there's way too much technical focus right now, and there's way too little musical focus. So, a guy sent me a record once, Peter, gosh, what was his name? This was in 2005. It sounded like it had 6 blankets on it. I mean, it was a disaster. Frequency balance. But that's just because his monitoring situation was bad. And once I went in there and EQ'd it and did my thing, it was a gorgeous record. It was musical, it was powerful, it was beautiful. And that can work. Now, obviously, you don't want to sound like 6 blankets, but the point is, if you've got your monitoring in a reasonable place and you have a reasonable respect for the mental gymnastics that have to happen, but you're still acting from artistic passion and vision and creating things that have a singular identity as a song, and then you go on to the next one, and it has a singular identity as a song, you go on to the next one, and then you listen to them all together and you think, oh no, don't do that. Send me those 10 or 12 or 15 or whatever. The job of mixers is to mix. The job of mixers is to mix. And what does that mean? It means creating unique and interesting and powerful artistic statements one at a time. All the technicals are overthought. Sample rate, peak level, da-da-da-da-da. Nope. Turn up the volume, make it dynamically move part to part, just enough, and then have no fear about the rest of it. So anything else that people say screws it up. You know. Do you want me to send you the uncompressed version? No. I don't want the uncompressed version. The mix is going to fall apart. Do I want the non-limited version if you limited it for the client to take home? Yes. That's the only thing. But I want the one that made everyone in the room get excited. So anything else that people are saying is in the way of that. Does that help? Yeah, I really want to encourage mixers to turn up the volume and enjoy the process. Now, you know, if part to part you've got huge dynamic moves, that's too much. If your monitoring situation and your brain aren't quite on the page with that, then you could have a really messy kick drum, or your bass kick might be a mess or whatever. Yeah, okay. It'd be better if you tighten that up. But if the mix is musical, ultimately, if it has a artistic musicality, I can correct that stuff somewhat. Of course, it would be better if you were doing it because you have all the power there. But it's more important to be artistically musical and have a clear, you know, passionate, vision-inspired statement than to send me a bunch of boring things. You know. So don't do anything for the mastering guy except make awesome mixes. that are dynamically appropriate for the style. Some styles are more dynamic, some are less dynamic. Verse to chorus might be more or less, depends on the style, but just make it work with the volume up and enjoy the gig, enjoy the process.
Okay, what is your experience with Dan, and I'm not sure how to say his name, Auerbach?
Auerbach, yeah.
I said it right, okay.
Yeah.
Your experience with him, would you speak on it?
Oh, my experience with him are great. I consider him a friend. I don't speak for him if I'm his friend, but I think so. I think he's a great guy. He's an Ohio guy like me, and that means something to us. We are we consider to be kind of outspoken and sincere like an East Coast person, but a little bit more sensitive and nice in like a West Coast kind of politically correct kind of way. Where Midwestern people tend to be capable of this kind of very human rapport, and Dan is very, very much that way. He's very emotionally engaged. He's very bright. He's very collaborative. He's very strong-willed, but not to the point of being a difficult person. He just has very clear artistic ideas, and then he's open to collaboration with people on teams that he sets up. As long as he keeps putting me on his team, that'll be a good day for me, because I think he has a wonderful heart and mind just as a human being. And then musically, I'm super interested in everything that he sends. I think it's all very, very interesting. I really enjoy the journey that I've heard from Brothers to El Camino to Turn Blue to his new solo record, and I don't want to speak out of school, but I hope I'll do the next thing they do as a band when Pat gets his drumming back together after I think he broke his collarbone or something. So both great guys. I mean, Pat's a great guy too. Pat gets a little bit of short shift with the world because Dan's now seen as the producer because of some things that he's done in a recent part of the decade. But in the beginning, Pat was recording them, and Pat's a great engineer. Pat sent me, he produced that Sheepdog's record. I don't know if it sold real well. That more had to do maybe with the label, but it was a great record. He mixed a tennis record, like alternative band, I guess you'd call them, tennis, indie alternative. That was probably the best mixes I received in a 12-month period. That's Pat Carney, the drummer of the Black Keys, who's been on the road, banging loud, comes off. He's using my Spiral Groove speakers, actually. He's got Metro Halo converters, my Spiral Groove speakers. The preamp was a Shadow Hills 8-channel, and the rest was in the box. That was probably the best mixes I'd heard in a 12-month period. He was shocked. I was like, dude, you hit that out of the park. That was amazing. So really, both of them, great guys, both different but complementary to each other, and I respect and like them both very much. I think they're both very musically interesting, and they're both very good people. Good people, good music. You can't lose with that combo.
For those of you who want to look the name up, it's Dan, D-A-N-A-U-E-R-B-A-C-H, and Pat what?
Carney. Patrick Carney. C-A-R-N-E-Y.
C-A-R-N-E-Y. N-E-Y. Carney.
Yeah.
Okay, now...
Not your world, brother, but a lot of people do know them.
You have this one crappy piece of hardware. Can't believe you bought it. L2.
L2.
Do people still give you crap about that you've bought that?
They don't anymore. They used to. People don't give me crap about much anymore, but they're welcome.
Gets rid of that, huh?
They're welcome to try. No, I actually own 3 L2s. I have 2 backups, both with a rebuilt power supply, because the power supply in those things is notorious. When mine went down earlier last year, I did a record without it, and it has a quality that in my chain is important. But let's be clear, I don't use it really for limiting. I use it for this little mid-range pop that it has in the vocal. I like the pop of the mid-range in the vocal. And I have it set permanently at 1.4 dB. Anything over that, and it's just a complete disaster. It's not really a good limiter. It's, 20 years old at this point almost, I think. So, is it 20? Yeah, probably. Yeah, it was like around the finalizer era. God, that was a long time ago. So, yeah, it's a disaster as a limiter. But for my chain, it's essential. The record I did, I had to reprint the whole thing a couple days later. I had to stop the presses and tell everybody to wait and send it off for repair. And after that, I bought 2 more and had them, had the power supplies done for a few $100. And so I've got spares. I love that thing.
All right. Anybody got questions? Because we're at toward the end. If you got them, time to get them in now.
Get them in now. Got to go.
Shane Byrne wants to know, what's your favorite non-engineering musical memories, like playing years?
Oh, a personal question. Gosh, non-engineering musical memories. Playing years? Oh, gosh.
Anything.
Well, I mean, as an audience member, I saw Paco de Lucia, Al Di Meola, and John McLaughlin perform. Paco recently passed. That man was incredible. He blew my mind. Paco was amazing. And I've seen Long Long, the genius Asian, I think he's Chinese pianist, who's went from being a guy who could play fast to a guy who can play, like, I just don't have words for how well he plays. I saw him play Chopin with Columbus Symphony Orchestra, and about 10 years after he studied with some Italians that taught him how to be passionate, not just fast. And Long Long, that's the most amazing thing. Dr. John performance with Dan Auerbach at Bingham in Brooklyn, when they played the Dr. John Lockdown record with the studio band for 3 nights back to back. Dr. John was there for like a master class, because he's a ridiculous pianist. I mean, he's a jazz pianist, really. He's got his own thing, but it's in the jazz category. Professor Longhair probably would be considered a pre-runner. I used to listen to Professor Longhair and Dr. John when I was a kid. But yeah, seeing Dr. John with Dan and the studio band, that was great. Seeing the Black Keys Brothers tour for the first time, when they open up the set with Everlasting Light, the opening song on that record, and seeing 18,000 people go crazy for a record that I had done, and hearing them sing along to all the songs on the record, that being my first big record, there's no feeling really like that, where you feel like you played a part in those people's happiness and the success of the artist. That was a great feeling. As a musician, I think it was a cool era. I'm of the age where the 60s was where we look back as being the cool era in New York City. Hendrix used to play here, and he lit his guitar on fire in this club, and Bob Dylan played here, and so it was the late 80s when I was there, and 87, and that era was still fresh in the minds. Now it's like East Village is gentrified, and there's like a Gap and a Starbucks everywhere, and it's basically Disneyland, in my opinion. Fun place to go, but not the cultural mecca it was in the 60s, and then even in the 80s it was more interesting. And I really liked playing 6 nights a week with this band, these sweet Irish guys, Hank Waddell and company, and one night Jeff Healey came in. Jeff Healey's now passed. He was a blind guitarist, blues guitarist, most known probably, ironically, for Roadhouse. He was the bar band in Roadhouse, Patrick Swayze. And this was before all that, and Jeff was it was his first day in New York City with his manager, who was actually his drummer, but everyone bullshits, and he was like, "Oh, I'm Jeff's manager." I'm like, "Okay." Found out later in the movie he was his drummer, and so he said, "Could he sit in and play with you?" And our band was called Open Kitchen. That basically meant anybody could sit in and play. And he was like, "Here's $20. This guy just got signed to something, and he's here in New York, and here's $20. And I'm like, "Dude, we don't need your $20. We'll let any joker sit in and play for a couple songs." And I gave my Les Paul, or maybe it was a Jaguar. I can't remember if it was a Les Paul or a Jaguar, but I gave it to Jeff Healey, and he sat down and put it on his lap, and I was telling him what kind of guitar it was, which was really silly and probably offensive, and in retrospect very embarrassing, and what pedal and what amp and whatever, and he just sat down and just started shredding, you know, some really passionate, nice blues, and that was a really fun time to step back from the stage and do that. And yeah, I played after New York. I played back in Ohio. I got a pickup gig in a hippie band. We played some big like jam band festivals and bunch of like dead tunes that I didn't know. You know, it's an A minor, and I would like just solo an A minor or whatever. And that was a lot of fun. Great people there. Group called Strangely Enough. And then I played for 14 years in my own rock group. I sang, played guitar, and we made a few records that were never really intended to be hits. They were more about just the vibe. They're about vibe and creativity, and that's really what I do here. It's what I discovered, was that vibration and bringing out the creativity in other people's work and increasing that power through the vibration, that's really my art form. So all the music making I did, and I still play a little. I mean, I have a grand piano, and I have my instruments, and I've got a Moog, and I mess around a little bit for fun, but to me it's always been about texture and vibe. And that's what the band did, you know, after those other experiences I mentioned. So lots of good memories, many good ones. As Paul Simon said, preserve your memories. They're all that's left you, and you wanna hold on to those. Lots of bad shit happened too, but I just tried to think about that. Anyway, what else? Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Here's a guy. How do you know you have enough low end? I favor high end more most of the time. Thank you, Todd. Todd, checking out. Well, how do you know you have enough low end? I mean, it's partly a room thing and a monitoring thing, and it's a referencing thing. You have to listen to material in your room and upgrade your room, bass trap your room, figure out what's going on there so that you can make good quality stuff that represents the right kind of frequency balance. Again, not from a technical standpoint, but from an artistic standpoint. If the frequencies are in the way, they mute the artistic statement. If the frequencies support the artistic statement, then they make everyone in the room excited. So that's really what you got to do. Now, the second part of his comment, I favor high end more most of the time. All right, I'm going to be super weird here and go on a limb with some intuitive guess that someone who favors high end most of the time is, and this gets back to the esoteric thing about listening. If we think of our body, this is the high end, and down here in the hips is the low end, and here in the heart and stomach is the mid-range, kind of like chakras. So if your focus as a person is on high end, then energetically your balance as a person is probably in your head or in your concept, you know, from like a chakra standpoint. You have the crown chakra, which is the top of the head, and you have this third eye point, and you have this one, and then you have this one, and this one, this one, this one. They have 7 chakras. So probably somebody who favors high end, and this could be totally wrong, I don't know this person, but is someone who's doing a lot of thinking about details. They're thinking about clarity, but they're not feeling enough. If you feel too much, then you over push the bottom because you're into the push. And if your mid-range is prominent, then that's probably the best mistake of the 3 because the other 2 are easier to correct. But this goes back to being a worthy vessel, in the words of William Burroughs. You got to get your body and your psyche right. You've got to be a balanced listener. You've got to listen to the meat in the mid. You've got to listen to the low mid. You've got to feel the rhythm and the driver motion and the groove, and you've got to also have the clarity and also have the reverb tail and the delay tail and the spitty vocal and the rest of it. So with no way of knowing this person, it's just an interesting concept. You know, we listen to what we are in music. If you're a guitar player, you listen to guitar. If you're a singer, you listen to singing. Some people don't even hear vocals because they're more of like a musician mindset. They don't even listen to vocals until like 10 listens into a song. So we are attracted to what we are energetically. But what we want to be energetically is a good balance of everything. Because a good balance of everything means that you have cleared out the impediments that were in the way, and then you can really be effective. So on the technical side, you know, technical answer, treat your room, deal with your monitoring, have some ref tracks, check the ref tracks at the beginning of the day, and then start your work. Don't constantly compare to the ref tracks because then you're going to get too analytical, you're going to nerd out, you're going to be fear-based and technical. It's more important to be slightly more artistic than slightly more technical. But you want to have that technical basis. So have some refs, have your room in good shape, you know. But the other part of it, the more out there part of it, is as a person, we're attracted to who we are. So get yourself in a place where you can feel and experience all of music with equal respect and rapport, and you can make better decisions that way. Helpful?
He says yes. Okay. Move air yet loud. You said things that contributed to your success, notably 3 things that you consider quite hard to do. Volume without smashing it, low end without crapping it out, and harmonics that still sound clean and respectful to the source but are actually harmonically distorted.
That's actually a pretty exact quote of what I said. Yes, so, I mean, how can I clarify that?
Well, first, of course, people would like to know how you're doing this, but like I would submit stuff and people, I would post stuff and people would say it sounded distorted, and to me it sounded great. The distortion that I was used to hearing sounded horrible or was distorted, and I'm still hearing what I considered clarity. So when you talk about distortion yet there's clarity, what are ways that we would achieve that?
Well, again, I mean, a little bit of a broken record, but it goes back to monitoring. You know, if you can't hear it because the physics of your speaker are keeping you from hearing it, then you just don't know it's there. So the first part is that you've got to improve rooms and monitoring. The second part is that distortion is a word. What people mean by distortion is like the word love. You know, there's as many meanings for distortion as you can just think up. So some distortion, good or bad, very subjective. Some of it not. Some of it's just crapping out that you can't hear. When I'm talking about distortion, I'm talking about a real subtle harmonic shift from kind of the digital sound to the analog sound. So my chain is set up to infuse the analog sound, if you will. That's kind of a weird, vague BS term, I admit. But the analog harmonic content is being infused by my work via the chain and also some of the EQ choices, which are emphasizing certain frequencies. But it's being infused without going over the top, where it sounds like I ran it through like a pair of Chandler compressors or a Neve or something with a really heavy transformer or a really heavy coloring. So I'm talking about, for my work, it's a fairly subtle harmonic shift that happens. But in the mastering world, nothing is subtle. So little things go a long way. But yeah, you got to be able to technically hear it. But then really the question becomes, what is this distortion? I mean, I will send stuff back and people will say, you know, you went too far. I mean, I will still flirt with the line to this day. I will probably always flirt with the line. I mean, I'm better at not going over the line, but I like to go right up to the line on things. I'm a guitar player at heart. We push it to 11. You know, that's where, you know, an amplifier that's 1,000 watts that's barely on, I'd rather have a 2-watt amplifier that's being driven, because when things are pushed, they start to open up in a way that I think is more musical and interesting. So I'm always flirting with the line, but you can't flirt with the line if you cannot tell where the line is in terms of the physics of your room and monitoring, or in terms of your perception ability. So it's a tricky thing. You know, this is an experience thing. You've got to work on the room. You've got to work on the monitoring, and then you got to figure out what lines in the sand you're going to push. Where are you going to push and pull? Because the neutral balance thing, another word for that is flat or boring. Nobody wants to hear that. It's not emotionally engaging. You know, it's the people with annoying voices that end up on radio because they cut. You know, and it's certain like Perry Farrell. You know, back in the day, that guy's got he's got a really high annoying voice. It's perfect. It cuts through the rock band. You know, so things can't be neutral. They can't be flat. They can't be even. They can't be overly analytically, technically correct. You have to push and pull things so that stuff jumps and flirts with the line. Too much this, too much that. It takes time, though. You know, but again, it starts with monitoring, and then the inner artistic voice that says, "This is what I hear." Does that help?
Yep. Okay, you guys. If you don't have any more questions, we're done.
We're done. All right. Well, it's my pleasure to meet the folks that were here. It's a Sunday, kind of a quiet day. And I've got a little work to do today. But hopefully this is useful to you and anyone checking it out on the web. Hopefully inspiring and useful to you as well. Thanks for doing it. It's fun to do every so often.
You know what?
I lost you. Are you there? You're frozen. You're frozen with a finger. It's like one finger. See, let's do it. You know what?
Of course, I dropped offline.
All right. Like your big idea of the day, and the universe was like, "No, fuck that." No, now I'm dying to hear it.
Yeah. So, what do you have first? What do you have coming up that you're getting into?
Well, you know, to me, it's just another day at the office. You know, I do what I do 5 to 7 days a week, just depending. So, you know, nothing really. I mean, things just show up. They show up and I do them. That's kind of my gig. I live on about a 3-day schedule at most. So really nothing particularly exciting to say. People keep sending me work and I keep making people happy, and that's my life, you know.
How many projects do you end up doing in a day?
Well, on any given day, it's multiple. You know, my general schedule, not so different than other people who are successful at this gig, is, you know, well, I don't know other people's schedule, but I assume, you know, I do like a new record a day if there's a full record to do, and then I'll do touch-up work on past stuff, which might be 1 or 2 or 3 or could be 5. So different times of the day I'll do different things. You know, midday is usually administrative time and touch-up time, and then usually when it's dark at night is actually when I work and do creative work. When the world goes to bed or when it gets darker out and things are a little quieter, then I usually, not always, but I usually do first stuff at night. Sometimes that changes. I mean, if I'm feeling it, I might do first thing in the morning. Like when my ears are super fresh, instead of getting drained by doing sort of analytical touch-up stuff, I might use that energy first thing in the morning and be creative right away with the new project. But it's a balance. It's a balance of old and new. Not old, but it's a balance of new and minor revisions every day. I try to keep it moving so that I can turn stuff around quick, and the quicker I make people happy, the more people that come by. So
it's pretty cool seeing you and your lady out at the events, because when you guys are together, I don't know if I don't know how much you notice, but you haven't lost. It's like you still have that little kid in you, bro. It's like people trip out on me because I'm still smiling.
Right.
You're out having fun. You guys are out having fun, and you still have that smile, like you haven't lost it for music. And it's pretty.
Well, totally. I mean, like I said before, I don't think setting out in life to make a career in music is the way to go. I think setting out in life to really enjoy music and music making is the way to go. And if along the line of that, you have a value to others, it'll work itself out, So it's important to me to remember every day, like, I'm just doing what I love to do, and people love me doing it, and they pay me for it. Okay. That's very different than trying to, conquer the world or hold on to my position as a certain established character. I mean, I have the benefit of being the underdog in a certain way in the music business with a lot of guys that are in their 70s and in their 60s, and there's this whole established world, So I don't have to hold on to anything. I mean, there's guys under me trying to take my jobs, and good luck. That's my take. But I don't look at it like a competitive thing unless I'm doing the work. If I'm doing the work, I'm there to kick ass for my client and to kick the ass of whatever mastering they didn't like. But the rest of the time, it's just the enjoyment of music, and the enjoyment of music makers. Music makers are crazy people. You got to take us all with a grain of salt, and try and enjoy it. And I think that enjoyment energy is important because, again, going back to what I said an hour ago, I really do believe that what people hear in a song, whether it be Amy Mann or Kanye West or instrumental jazz, they hear the energy of the people. And it's people to people that are communicating through the language of music. So my energy as a person is whatever it is. I'm outspoken. I'm very creative. I think whatever. I'm not going to define myself, but people like that energy in their work, and that's what you see when I'm in the world. That's how I am. I mean, I'll say whatever to anyone. I really don't give a fuck and never have, because my mom was an interior designer and a successful, outspoken professional artist, and I was fortunate to see her example, imperfect example, but a good example. No one's perfect. A good example of how to be a professional artist. You have to do what you do. You have to serve people. But you have to respect yourself, and you have to be passionate about how you see things, and you have got to be good. If you're good and you're humble and you serve people and you have fun doing it, I mean, that's the cocktail. So that's my approach, and that energy is what we all bring to the work. And when we bring good energy and we have skill and some kind of artistic complement, then we win. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to win together. It's a team sport. If Dan Auerbach wouldn't have heard my work, maybe someone else would have. But Dan heard my work, and in one day, I went from being a guy who never did a big record to a guy who did really a very big record for that year that's actually carried on and sort of started a bit of a trend in the rock world. It's really started kind of a movement. And I was doing the same work the day before. So, maybe a year later it could have been someone else, but the way it went down was, you're unknown until you're known. But you've got to do that work in your own private space and build that momentum and have that going before anybody's ever going to hear it. So being too caught up in anything except your own mojo and your own contribution to your clients and your artists and your friends is kind of silly to me. Let's have fun making music awesome and making people happy. To me, that's the bottom line.
That's an awesome place to end, bro.
All right.
I think this one just as good as the last one, where you didn't just sit up and say I'm a mastering engineer nerd, and so this was good stuff, bro.
Awesome. Well, I will see you around the internets.
Yep, I'll be seeing you out at the events, live and in person and everything too.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, everybody.
Thank
We're
you, guys.
out, man. Much appreciated. You guys want to say your goodbyes and thank yous?
Thank you very much, man. It was really awesome.
Thank you. Hope it was helpful to you. Talk soon.
Thank you, bro. Let's see. There's another hangout going on today, folks. C. Brett Campbell. I should have did this in the beginning. TSU is what they're going to be talking about. He has somebody from Steely Dan on there. I forget who. Who was it? Elliot Randall from Steely Dan, and then Roy. Here it is, Roy Shamir, special guest. So get on Google Plus. Go look up C. Brett Campbell. What is the event? He has a Google Plus event going on. Hopefully, it's still going on right now. And it's part of, let me see, somethingradio.com. xrpradio.co.uk. Never heard of that, so I'm going to be going and checking that out. They're starting some stuff up over there for us to learn from. Just letting everybody know.
Awesome.
All right, so Brian, I'm going to end it. Bruh, like I said, peace to you. Much appreciated. You're the best at these, bro. You're killing it.
Peace out. Talk to you soon.
All right, everybody. Peace out.